12. Murder in the night. Maybe it was Lady Greystoke you heard moving around in the hut, suggested Brown. No, said Annette, I could hear her breathing. She was sound asleep. Then it must have been the old girl. It was not she, either. After I woke up, I heard her sort of groaning in her sleep and snoring I guess it was, but she stopped right away. Then I guess you must have been dreaming, girlie, said Brown. Perhaps I was, said the girl, but some unusual sound must have awakened me, for I sleep very soundly, and I was sure that I heard someone afterward. Perhaps you had better go back and go to sleep again now, he suggested. Really, Mr. Brown, I couldn't. I am so wide awake, and then I felt funny in there, as though, I don't know. She lowered her voice to a whisper. It was as though there was something terrible in there, something that frightened me. You don't mind my staying out here with you, do you, Mr. Brown? I'll say I don't, girlie. You and Lady Greystoke are about the only human beings in the bunch. The rest of them are nuts. You do not like them, Mr. Brown? Oh, the old girl's harmless, she's just a nuisance, and Tibbsy means well, I guess, but when it comes to doing anything more than pressing somebody's pants, he just ain't all there. And the other one? Inquired Annette. I think you do not like him so much. Him? He's the last zero after the decimal point. No, I do not like him, either, Mr. Brown. I am afraid of him. Afraid of him? What you got to be afraid of him about? In London he say things to me a man should not say to a nice girl. Well, the dirty so-and-so, growled Brown. If he ever makes any cracks at you again, honey, let me know. Say, I'd spill him all over the ground and then wipe him up with himself. You would protect me, Mr. Brown? She raised her dark eyes to his, questioningly. And how? The girl sighed. You are so big and strong. You know, said Brown, I like you a lot, girlie. I am glad. I think I like you, too. Brown was silent for a moment. If we ever get out of here, he said, presently, and then stopped. Yes, she inquired. If we ever get out of here, what? He fidgeted uneasily, and threw another piece of wood on the fire. I was just thinking, he said, lamely. What were you thinking? I was just thinking that maybe you and me, that may. Yes, she breathed, encouragingly. Say, you don't have to call me Mr. Brown. What shall I call you? My best friends call me Kai. What a funny name, I never hear a name like that before. What does it mean? It is not really your name? It's short for the name of the town where I come from, Chicago, he explained. Oh, she laughed, then you spell it CHI and not SHY. I think maybe you should spell it the last way. I ain't never been accused of being shy before, he said, but I guess you're right. When I try to say things to you, my tongue runs out on me. What funny expressions you use. You Americans are all so funny. Oh, I don't know, he said, it's the foreigners that seem funny to me. Am I funny? Well, you got some funny little ways with you, but when you pull them, they're cute. You think so? I am glad that you do, Mr. Brown. Kai. Kai, have you another name? Maybe that would be easier to say. Yep. My real name's Neil. That's a nice name. So's Annette. I'm crazy about Annette. You like the name? Yes, and the girl, too. I like the girl a lot. He reached over and took her hand and drew her toward him. No, you must not do that, she said sharply, and pulled away, and then suddenly she cried out, oh, look, look, and pointed. Brown looked up in the direction that she indicated. Blazing against the dark background of the forest were two yellow-green points of flame. Annette moved quickly toward him and pressed against his side. "What is it?" she whispered in a frightened voice. "Don't be scared, honey, it's only looking at us. That won't hurt us none." "What is it?" she demanded. "I've seen cows' eyes shine like that in the dark," he said. "It might be a cow." "But you know it's not a cow. There are no cows in the jungle. You just say that so that I will not be frightened." "Well, now that you mention it, maybe there ain't no cows in the jungle, but whatever it is, I'm going to frighten it away." He stooped over and gathered a stick from the fire, one end of it was blazing. Then he stood up and held it at the burning eyes. There was a shower of sparks, an angry growl, and the eyes disappeared. "That fixed him," he said. "See how easy it was?" "Oh, you are so very brave, Neil." He sat down beside her, and this time, he boldly put an arm about her. She sighed and snuggled closer to him. "A nice girl should not do this," she said, "but it make me feel so safe." "You never was less safe in your life, girlie," said Brown. "You think the eyes will come back?" she asked, with a shudder. "I was not thinking about eyes, girlie." "Oh." It was long after 3 o'clock before Brown thought to awaken Sporov. When the prince came into the firelight, he was nervous and ill at ease. "Did you see or hear anything during the night?" he asked. "Something came up and looked at us," said Brown, "but I threw some fire at it, and it beat it." "Everything all right in camp?" he asked. "Sure," said Brown, "everything's okay." "I slept so soundly that anything might have happened," said the prince. "I never knew a thing from the time I lay down until you awakened me." "Well, I guess I'll go tear off a few yards myself," said the pilot, "and you better go back in and try to get some sleep, girlie." They walked together the few paces to the shelter. She shuddered a little. "I hate to go back in there," she said. "I do not understand why, but I just dread it." "Don't be silly," he said. "There ain't nothing going to hurt you. That dream got your nanny." "I do not know what is my nanny," she replied, "and I am not so certain it was a dream." "Well, you run along like a good girl, and I'll sleep with one eye open. If you hear anything, call me." It was daylight when Brown was awakened by a piercing scream from the adjoining shelter. "My word!" exclaimed Tibbs. "What was that?" But Brown was already on his feet and running to the women's quarters. He saw Sporov standing by the fire, ashen grey in the morning light. His lower jaw drooped loosely, his eyes were staring, fixed upon the hut in which the women slept. Brown collided with Annette, who was running from the hut as he started to enter. "Oh, Neil," she cried, "it was no dream. Something horrible happened in there last night." He brushed past her and went into the hut. Jane was standing in horrified silence, gazing down at the Princess Sporov. "God!" exclaimed Brown. Kitty Sporov was dead, her skull split wide. "How horrible," breathed Jane. "Who could have done this thing?" Tibbs joined them. He remained silent and unmoved in the face of this gruesome discovery, always the perfect servant. "Where is the prince?" asked Jane. "He was on guard," said Brown. "He was standing there by the fire when I came in." "Somebody will have to tell him," she said. "I reckon it won't be no news to him," said Brown. Jane looked up at him quickly. "Oh, he couldn't," she cried. "Well, who could, then?" demanded the pilot. "If you wish, milady," suggested Tibbs, "I will inform His Highness." "Very well, Tibbs." The man stepped out into the open. The prince was still standing gazing at the hut, but when he saw Tibbs coming toward him, he gathered himself together. "What's the matter in there?" he asked. "What was Annette screaming about?" "Something has happened to Her Highness, she's dead." "What? Who? It can't be possible." She was quite all right when she went to bed last night. She has been murdered, Your Highness, said Tibbs. Oh, so horribly. Murdered? He still stood where he was, making no move to approach the hut. He watched Jane and Brown emerge and come toward him. It is horrible, Alexis, said Jane. I can't imagine who could have done it, nor why. I know who did it, he said, excitedly. I know who did it and I know why. What do you mean? Demanded Jane. Alexis pointed a trembling finger at Brown. Last night I heard that man tell Tibbs to kill her. One of them must have done it, and I don't believe that it was Tibbs. Prince Sporove, I don't believe that it was either one of them, said Jane. Ask Tibbs if he didn't tell him to kill her, cried Sporove. Jane looked questioningly at Tibbs. Well, milady, Mr. Brown did suggest that I bump her off, but it was only by way of being a joke, milady. How was she killed? Asked the prince. Jane looked puzzled. Why, it must have been with the hatchet. Where is the hatchet? Find the hatchet, and you'll have the murderer, said Sporove. But suppose he threw it away, asked Jane. He couldn't have thrown it away. I've been on guard here since 3 o'clock, and nobody entered your part of the shelter after Annette went in after I came on guard. Whoever did it, probably hid it. It happened before you went on guard, said Annette. It happened before Mr. Brown went on guard. It was that awakened me, I know it now, and when I thought she was moaning in her sleep and snoring, she was really dying. It was the death rattle. Oh, how horrible. Just when was that, Annette? Asked Jane. It was while Tibbs was on guard and about half an hour before Mr. Brown went on. I couldn't get back to sleep, and I went out and joined him. I sat up with him until he awoke the prince. Jane turned to Tibbs. Was Mr. Brown asleep when you went in to wake him at midnight? She asked. Yes, milady, replied Tibbs. How do you know? Well, I could tell by his breathing for one thing, and then I had difficulty in arousing him. He might have feigned that, said Sporove. Was the prince asleep when you went in there, Tibbs, to awaken Brown? He seemed to be sound asleep, milady. I carried a burning brand in for a torch. I could see them quite distinctly. He was asleep, and I was pretending to be, I suppose, said Brown. Find the hatchet, said Sporove. Well, suppose you find it, retorted Brown. I don't know where it is. Tibbs says that both of you were asleep. That leaves Tibbs and Annette and me under suspicion, said Jane. There ain't no sense to that way of figuring, said Brown. We all know that you and Annette didn't have nothing to do with it, so you two are out. I know damned well that I didn't do it, and I'm just about as sure that Tibbs didn't, so that puts it up to the only one in the bunch that would profit by the old woman's death. You'd profit as much as any of us, pointed out Sporove, sullenly. You knew that your life was at stake, that if you didn't get out of here very soon you might never get out. You knew, and you said that my wife was all that made it impossible for us to start together tomorrow. I can see your whole line of reasoning, my man. You felt that the princess could never get out of here, anyway, and so you just hurried matters along by killing her yourself. All right, Sherlock Holmes, you've got it all figured out, haven't you? But what are you going to do about it? Find the hatchet, repeated Sporove. All right, said Jane. You men go in the women's part of the shelter and search, and Annette and I will search your part. Sporove followed Jane to the door of the men's hut. I cannot go in there where she is, he said. I want to remember her as she was when I last saw her alive. Jane nodded. Help us search here, then, she said. There was really no place to search except among the litter of grasses that the men had used as beds. Jane searched the pile upon which Alexis had slept, while Alexis took Tibbs and Annette poked around in those belonging to Brown. Presently the girl's hand came into contact with something cold and hard. She stiffened as her fingers touched it, as though by intuition she knew what it was. With a shudder she withdrew her hand. For a moment she remained very quiet and tense. She was thinking rapidly. Then she arose to her feet. "There is nothing here," she said. Burroughs glanced up at her quickly. "There is nothing here, either," said Jane. "I can find nothing in Tibbs' bed," said Alexis, "but perhaps, Annette, you did not search Brown's bed carefully enough. Let me see." She took a step toward him as though to prevent the search. "What is the use?" she said. "It is not there, it's just a waste of time to look again." "Nevertheless, I shall look," said Alexis. Burroughs stooped and slipped his hand in among the grasses. He did not have to search long. "Here it is," he said. "I don't see how you could have missed it, Annette," he added, with a sneer. "You must have had your own reasons." He withdrew the hatchet from among the grasses and held it up to their view. The head was smeared with blood. "Are you satisfied now, Jane?" demanded the prince. "I can't believe it of Brown," she said. "But you could have believed it of me." "Frankly, Alexis, yes." "Well, you've got plenty of proof now as to who did it. What are you going to do about it? The fellow ought to be destroyed." "Who ought to be destroyed?" demanded Brown. He and Tibbs were standing in the doorway. "The hatchet was found in your bed, Brown," said Jane. "The prince has it, as you can see, it is covered with blood." "Oh, so you planted that thing in my bed, did you, you lousy little runt? Trying to frame me, eh?" "I do not understand your talk," said Alexis. "I only know what I heard you say last night and what I found in your bed. Tibbs has already corroborated my report of what you said, and Lady Greystoke and Annette saw me find the hatchet in here right where you had hidden it." Brown looked from one to another with a questioning expression in his eyes. Could it be that these people believed that he had done this thing? He realized that what slender evidence was at hand pointed to him. "Well," he said, "don't get it into your heads that you're going to hang me." 13. Treachery. Teachy little band of Waziri warriors under Muviro had moved steadily westward since their encounter with Tarzan. The 10 moved silently along a winding jungle trail. There was no song nor laughter, and when they spoke, which was seldom, their tones were low, for they were in a country strange to them, with the temper of whose people they were not familiar. They moved warily, every sense alert. Sometime during this day they hoped to contact the Bukina, the people who lived nearest to the Kavuru, and here they hoped to have word of Tarzan of the apes. Presently, above the subdued noises of the jungle, they heard the excited chattering of a monkey above them, and a moment later a familiar little figure swung downward through the trees. "It is Nkima," said Muviro. "The big bwana must be near." Little Nkima jabbered with excitement. He leaped to the shoulder of Muviro and jumped up and down, screaming and chattering. He leaped to the ground and ran ahead very fast, jabbering excitedly in his high, little voice, as he continually looked back at them. He would run ahead until a bend in the trail threatened to hide them from his view, then he would run back and tug at Muviro's legs before starting off again at great speed. "Something is wrong," said one of the warriors to Muviro. "Little Nkima is trying to tell us." "He wants us to hurry," said Muviro, "perhaps something has happened to the big bwana." Then he broke into a trot, his fellows following close behind, but still Nkima ran ahead, always urging them to greater speed. Members of a warrior clan that is trained from childhood in feats of endurance, the Waziri could maintain for hour after hour a pace that would soon exhaust an ordinary man. Their smooth, ebony bodies glistening with sweat, their broad chests rising and falling to their unhurried breathing, their supple muscles rolling easily. They presented a splendid picture of primitive savagery, to which a note of barbaric color was added by anklets and armlets of strange design, their weapons, their shields, and the flowing white plumes that surmounted their heads. Here, indeed, were men, the very sight of whom would have instilled respect, and perhaps fear, in the hearts of any strange tribesman who might see them. And thus it was, when breaking from the jungle into a clearing, little Nkima still in the lead, they burst upon the view of a score of women working in the fields before the village of Udalo, chief of the Nkima. With terrified cries of warning, the women fled for the village gate. Nkima warriors inside the kraal seized their weapons and ran to meet their women, and as the rearmost of the latter entered the village, the warriors made haste to close the gate behind them, and as some attended the gate, others manned the barbette inside the palisade over the top of which they could loose their arrows upon an enemy. At the sight of the village and the fleeing women, Muviro had halted his warriors. He saw the hostile attitude of the Nkima, but he attributed it to the fact that they did not know whether he came in peace or war. Nkima was very much excited. He waved his hands and jabbered loudly. He was trying so hard to make them understand that his master was a captive in the village. It was always a mystery to Nkima that these Gomangani could not understand him. It seemed that no one could understand him except his cousins, brothers, and sisters, and his beloved Tarzan. Everyone else must be very stupid. Muviro left his companions at a short distance from the village and advanced slowly toward the palisade, making the sign of peace that the villagers might know that they did not come with hostile intent. Udalo, the chief, standing upon the barbette, looked down upon the approaching warrior and his companions. He knew that these were indeed fighting men, and while there were only 10 of them he was glad to see the peace sign, for there might be many others back in the forest and this only an advance guard. As Muviro halted at the foot of the palisade and looked up, Udalo addressed him. "Who are you? What do you want?" he demanded. "I am Muviro, chief of the Waziri. We have come here to meet our big chief, Tarzan of the Apes, or to get word of him. Has he been here?" Gupingu, the witch doctor, was standing beside Udalo. Searing his heart was the memory of a secret he dared tell no one, the secret of the release of Tarzan upon his promise that the Kavuru would not steal the daughters of Gupingu, and yet almost immediately Nika, his favorite daughter, had been stolen. Gupingu was confident now that not only was Tarzan a Kavuru, but that it was he who had come back to steal Nika. Resentment and hatred burned in the breast of Gupingu. He recalled that Tarzan had said that he was a Waziri, and, assembling all the facts as he knew them, he conjectured that the Waziri were either the vassals or the allies of the Kavuru. "Do not trust them, Udalo," he said to the chief. "They are the people of the Kavuru who escaped us. He has sent them back here to be revenged." Scowling down upon Muviro, Udalo thought quickly. He would like to be revenged upon the Kavuru, but he feared reprisals, and, too, he did not know but what there might be a large body of them back in the forest. The truth or falsity of this he must ascertain before he could make any definite plans. Annoyed because he had received no answer, Muviro spoke again, this time impatiently. "We come in peace," he said, "to ask a question. Is Tarzan, our master, here?" "There," whispered Gupingu to Udalo, "he admits that the Kavuru is his master." "He is not here," said Udalo, "we know nothing of him, and I do not know that you come in peace." "You are not speaking true words," said Muviro. "Little Nkima, the monkey, is Tarzan's friend. He brought us here, and he would not have done so had Tarzan not been here." "I did not say that Tarzan had not been here," retorted Udalo. "I say that he is not here, and that I know nothing of him. I do not know where he went after he left here." "We do not fear 10 men," said Udalo. "The 10 may enter the village, then we may talk. If you come in peace, you will do this. If you do not do it, Udalo will know that you have come to make war. As you can see, he has many warriors. We are not afraid of you, but we do not want war. We have come in peace, replied Muviro, but warriors do not lay aside their weapons. If you have so many brave warriors, why should you fear 10 men? We do not fear 10 men, said Udalo. The 10 may enter and bring their weapons, but the rest of your warriors must not approach the village. There are no others with us, said Muviro. We are alone. This was the information that Udalo wished. You may come in, he said, I will order the gates opened. Then he turned and whispered to Gupingu. Muviro signaled for his men to approach. The gates swung open, and they entered the village of the Bukina. Udalo and Gupingu had left the barbet and gone together toward the chief's hut. They were whispering volubly with many gesticulations, Gupingu explaining, Udalo assenting and giving orders. At the chief's hut they separated, Udalo remaining to await the coming of the visitors, while Gupingu hastened to his own hut. As the Waziri entered the village street, they were surrounded by warriors and conducted to the hut of the chief, where Udalo awaited them. Here commenced one of those long palavers so dear to the hearts of African natives. With endless circumlocution they iterated and reiterated, and in the end nothing had been said by Udalo other than that Tarzan was not in his village and that he knew nothing whatsoever about him, nor did he know anything concerning the Kavuru or the location of their village, none of which Muviro believed. And while the palaver progressed, Gupingu was busy in his hut grinding herbs and boiling them in water to extract their juices. He constantly muttered and mumbled to himself, but it is doubtful that he was chanting an incantation over the mess that he was brewing, and for the same reason that he did not lay out amulets before him or make passes over the brew with magic sticks or the tail of a zebra, he had no audience. While the Bukina warriors and their visitors palavered and Gupingu concocted his brew, the women were busy preparing a feast at the orders of Udalo, and in the trees beyond the clearing, a little monkey waited, whimpering and desolated, waited for the release of his master whom he thought to be still confined in a hut in the village. At last Gupingu left his hut, carrying his brew in a small gourd, and made his way directly to the women who were preparing the native beer for the feast. The women were already filling the gourds that would be passed around among the warriors. Gupingu went to the one who was filling the large ceremonial gourd that would be passed first to the chief and then to the visitors. They held a whispered conversation and then Gupingu walked away, leaving behind him the small gourd containing his brew. He approached the palaver from the rear of the Waziri, and catching Udalo's eye he nodded. Then the chief clapped his hands and ordered the feast served. The women came, bringing food and drink, and in the lead was one carrying the ceremonial gourd of native beer. Udalo took it from her and in silence raised it to his lips. His throat moved, as in the act of swallowing, but none of the liquor passed his lips. Then he passed it to Muviro, who took a long drink and handed the gourd to the Waziri next beside him, and so it passed among them all. But when the last of the 10 had drunk, the woman was waiting to take the gourd, though it was not yet empty, and the other women brought other gourds of beer to the Bukina warriors. Nor did Muviro nor any of his companions suspect that anything was wrong, for had they not seen Udalo drink from the same gourd as they? Now food was brought, but Muviro did not partake of it. He was looking, strange and glassy-eyed, at his fellow Waziri. What had gone wrong with his eyes? Everything was blurred. He saw his men sitting there with stony stares, their bodies weaving drunkenly. Then Muviro, the chief of the Waziri, staggered to his feet. He seized his long knife and drew it from his loincloth. "Kill," he cried. "We have been poisoned." Then he lurched and fell. Several of the remaining Waziri tried to rise, but the brew of Gupingu worked quickly and well, and though the Bukina warriors had leaped to their feet at a word from Udalo, following Muviro's command to his followers, their ready spears were not needed, as one by one the Waziri collapsed upon the ground. The Bukina gazed in astonishment upon this strange sight, for only Udalo and one woman knew what Gupingu had done. The witch doctor leaped among the fallen Waziri and beat his chest. "The medicine of Gupingu is strong," he said. "It lays low the enemies of the Bukina, even the great Kavuru it lays low." "Kill," shouted a woman, and others took up the refrain. "Kill! Kill! Kill!" "No," said Udalo. "Bind them securely so that they cannot escape and put them in the hut where the other Kavuru was confined. I shall send runners to the other villages of the Bukina, and when the moon is full on the second night, we shall dance and feast and eat the hearts of our enemies." Shouts of approval met this announcement, as warriors fell to the work of binding the prisoners and carrying them to the hut where Tarzan had been confined. In a tree at the edge of the jungle, a little monkey sat gazing disconsolately at the gates of the village. He brightened momentarily when he saw some warriors emerge, lithe young men these, who started off at a brisk gait in different directions, but they were not his beloved Waziri, and he sank again into despondency. It was many hours before the Waziri recovered from the effects of the narcotic. After they commenced to regain consciousness, it was some little time before they could realize their plight. Their heads ached and they were very sick. When they tried to move, they discovered that they were fast bound. "I knew," said Muviro, after they were able to talk among themselves, "that the chief lied to me. I should have been more careful. I should not have drunk his beer or allowed you to." "I saw him drink it, and so I thought it was safe," said another. "He only pretended to drink it," said Muviro. "This Udalo is a very bad man. What do you think he will do with us?" "I do not think," said Muviro, "I know." "And what do you know?" "I have heard about these Bukina. I have heard that while they are not cannibals, they do eat the hearts of their enemies, thinking that this will make them brave, for they are great cowards." "They will eat our hearts?" "Yes." "When?" "That we may not know until we are led out, but if we see that they are preparing for a great feast, we shall know that our end is near." "And we must lie here and be slaughtered like goats?" "If one of us can loosen his bonds, we may die as Waziri should, fighting," replied Muviro. "If only the big Bwana could know," said a young man, "he would save us." "I think perhaps that the big Bwana is already dead," said Muviro. "I think that Udalo has killed him, and eaten his heart, and if that is so, I am ready to die, too, for I do not care to live if the big Bwana be dead." "Nor I," said another. "I am so sick and my head hurts so, that I shall be glad to die." Night came, but no one approached the hut to bring them water or food. They were very miserable, and Muviro was chagrined to think that he had been led into such a trap. He was ashamed of himself, and he felt that only death could atone for his great fault. Miserable as they were, however, there was one even more miserable, a little monkey that shivered and trembled in a tree beyond the clearing that surrounded the village of Udalo, the Bukina. He heard the roar of Nkima, the lion, and the cry of Shieta, the leopard, and he climbed as high as he dared and hung there shivering and trembling, waiting for the thing that he knew was about to leap upon him and devour him. For such was the life of little Nkima. 14. Nkima forgets. Nika, the daughter of Gupingu, the witch doctor, accompanied her new captor because the only alternative was to be left alone in the jungle, a prey not only to wild beasts but to the numerous demons that infest the grim forest. At first, she momentarily expected the worst, but as time went on and no harm befell her, she gained confidence in the tall, bronzed warrior who accompanied her. Eventually all fear of him vanished. But if she were no longer afraid of Tarzan, she was far from being without fear, for the jungle night was very black and she conjured in that Stygian gloom all manner of horrifying creatures lying in wait to spring upon her. She could not understand how he traveled so surely through the darkness, and she marveled at his great courage. She knew that few men are so brave, and therefore it occurred to her that he must be a demon. Here, indeed, was an adventure, one that she, Nkima, could boast about as long as she lived, for had she not traveled at night through the jungle with a demon? She should have liked to ask him point blank, but of course there was always the danger of offending a demon. Perhaps if she questioned him adroitly, he might accidentally reveal the truth. It took quite a little willpower to screw up her courage to the point where she might ask him any question at all, but finally she succeeded. "What country are you from?" she asked. "I am from the land of the Waziri." "What sort of men are they?" "They are black men." "But you are white." "Yes," he replied, "but many years ago, when I was much younger, I was adopted into the tribe." "Have you ever met a demon?" she asked. "No, there are no such things." "Then you are not a demon?" "I am Tarzan of the apes." "Then you are not a Kavuru." "I told you I am from the land of the Waziri. When you are back among your people, tell them that Tarzan of the apes is not a Kavuru. Tell them also that he rescued you from the Kavuru, and that they must always be friends with Tarzan and the Waziri." "I will tell them," said Nkima, "and, after a moment, I am very tired." "We will stop here the rest of the night," said the ape man. Picking her up, he carried her high among the trees until she was very much afraid, and when he set her down upon a branch she clung frantically to the bole of the tree. Here the moon was filtering through the foliage, and it was much less dark than on the ground. In this semilight, Tarzan cut branches and built a platform upon which Nkima could lie during the night. In the early morning, Tarzan gathered food for himself and the girl, and after they had eaten, they resumed their journey toward the village of the Nkima. Feeling that she was approaching her home, and with all her fears dissipated, Nika's spirits rose. She laughed and chatted happily, and so at last they came to the edge of the clearing that encircles the village of the Nkima. "You are safe now, Nkima," said the ape man. "Return to your people and tell them that Tarzan of the apes is not their enemy." Then he turned and disappeared into the forest, but not before a pair of sharp little eyes had seen him, and as Nkima ran shouting toward the gates of the village, little Nkima swung through the trees screaming at the top of his voice, as he pursued his lord and master into the forest. The diminutive monkey soon overtook the ape man, and with a final ecstatic yelp leaped to one of his broad shoulders. Tarzan reached up and took the little fellow in his hand. "So Nkima is back again," he said. "Shieta did not get him." "Nkima is not afraid of Shieta," boasted the monkey. Shieta came into the trees hunting for little Nkima. Crouching, he crept, he came close. Little Nkima took a stick and beat Shieta on the head. Shieta was afraid, and ran away. "Yes," said Tarzan, "little Nkima is very brave." Thus encouraged, the monkey became enthusiastic and still more imaginative. Then came the Gomangani, many Gomangani. They were going to kill little Nkima and eat him. Little Nkima took 2 sticks and beat them on the head. They were afraid, they ran away. "Yes," said Tarzan, "everyone is afraid of little Nkima." Nkima stood up in the palm of Tarzan's hand and beat his chest. He grimaced, showing his teeth, and looked very fierce. "Everyone is afraid of Nkima," he said. Back along the trail to the north, in search of the village of the Kavuru went Tarzan and Nkima, and in the village of the Nkima, Nkima was the center of an admiring and curious throng. She told her story well, omitting nothing, adding considerable embroidery. It was a good story and it held her listeners spellbound. She told it many times, for the blacks like repetition, and always she stressed the fact that Tarzan had saved her, that he was the friend of the Nkima and that they must never harm Tarzan or the Waziri, and at that time she did not know that 10 Waziri lay bound in a nearby hut waiting for the orgy that would spell their doom. The Nkima warriors looked at one another and at Udalo, their chief. Udalo was slightly disconcerted. His runners had long since reached their destinations, and by this time the inhabitants of several villages must be on their way toward his kraal. Udalo did not know what to do about it. Gupingu was troubled, too. He realized now that the giant white, whom he had liberated, had not stolen his daughter as he had thought, but had rescued her and returned her to him. Udalo looked at him questioningly, but Gupingu did not know what to say. At last the chief spoke, for he saw the question in the eyes of his warriors. You said, Nika, that you thought this Tarzan of the apes was a demon. You said that he was fearless in the dark, and that he did things that no man could do. You said also that he went through the trees even more easily than the Kavuru. All these things we believe, but we could not believe them if we knew that he were a man like ourselves. He must therefore be a demon. None but a demon could have escaped from his bonds and left the village as easily as he did. If he were a demon, why did he save me from the Kavuru and return me to the village? Demanded Nika. The ways of demons are strange, said Udalo. I think that he wanted to make our fears dead, so that he could come safely into our village and harm us as he pleases. No, I am sure that he is a demon and a Kavuru, and that the prisoners we have taken are Kavuru. We shall not let them escape, they might come back and kill us, and furthermore the Bukina are coming from every village to dance and feast and eat the hearts of our enemies. Thus did the highest court of the Bukina uphold itself and place its final seal upon the death warrant of Muviro and his warriors. Through the brooding forest, moving northward, went the lord of the jungle, ignorant of the impending fate of his people, and on his shoulder rode Nkima, his little mind fully occupied with his boasting and the present. Short is the memory of Manu, the monkey. Great is his egotism and his selfishness. Little Nkima had not meant to forget the Waziri, they were his friends and he loved them. But being wholly occupied with thoughts of himself and with relief at being safe again in the arms of his master, the plight of the Waziri had been crowded into the background of his consciousness. Eventually he would think of them again, but perhaps only after it was too late to be of any benefit to them. And so the afternoon was half gone, and Nkima was happy, and Tarzan was satisfied, for once again he was on the trail of the Kavuru, concerning whom his curiosity had been intrigued by his brief contact with Edeni and the suggestion of mystery that the Kavuru's few words had lent to the manners and customs of this strange and savage tribe. Tarzan had not forgotten the Waziri, but his mind was at rest concerning them, for he felt that now, because of his rescue of Nika, they would be welcomed in the village of Udalo and directed on their way toward the Kavuru country. The ape-man seldom spoke unless that which he had to say warranted expression. Ordinarily he kept his thoughts to himself, especially in the presence of men, but he often relaxed with little Nkima and with Tanta, the elephant, for of such were the friendships of his childhood, and deep-rooted within him was the sense of their loyalty and sympathy. Thus it happened that while he was thinking of the Waziri, he spoke of them to Nkima. Muviro must be close to the village of the Bukina, he said, so he and his warriors will not be far behind us when we reach the village of the Kavuru. Then little Nkima will have many good friends to defend him from Shieta, the leopard, and from Hista, the snake, and from all the Gomangani who would catch and devour him. For a moment Nkima was silent. He was gathering his thoughts and his memory. Then suddenly he began to leap up and down upon Tarzan's shoulder and screech in his ear. "What is the matter with you, Nkima?" demanded the ape-man. "Are your brains chasing one another around in your head? Stop screaming in my ear." "Tarzan, the Waziri!" "The Waziri!" cried the little monkey. Tarzan looked quickly around. "What of them?" he demanded. "They are not here." "They are there," cried Nkima. "They are back there in the village of the Gomangani. Their feet and their hands are wrapped with cord, they lie in the hut where Tarzan lay. The Gomangani will kill them and eat them." Tarzan halted in his tracks. "What are you saying, Nkima?" he demanded, and then as best he could in the simple language that is common to the greater apes, and the lesser apes, and the little monkeys, and to their cousin Tongani, the baboon, and to their friend Tarzan, he narrated all that he had witnessed since he had met the Waziri in the forest. The ape-man turned about then, and started back toward the village of the Bukina. He did not ask Nkima why he had not told him this before, because he knew full well, nor did he scold the little monkey, nor reproach him, for he knew that it would do no good. Little Nkima would always be a monkey, he was born that way, and he would never have the mind of a man, even though in many other respects he was more admirable than man. The sun had not been long down when Tarzan came to the village. From a tall tree at the edge of the clearing, he looked down at the scene beyond the palisade. He saw that there were many people there, many more than there had been before, and he guessed that they were gathered for a feast. But his knowledge of the customs of the blacks told him that it would not be this night. Doubtless they were awaiting others that would come upon the morrow, perhaps then the feast would be held, and he guessed that the Waziri were being saved for sacrifice at that time. When boldness is necessary, the ape-man acts boldly. No spirit of bravado animates him, and when no emergency confronts him, his acts reflect only the caution and stealth of the wild beasts who, impelled by instinct, avoid all unnecessary risks and dangers. Tonight he reasoned that if the Waziri were already dead he could accomplish nothing by boldly entering the kraal of the Bukina. If they were still alive there was little likelihood that they would be harmed before the following night, but if he were wrong, and this night were the night set for their destruction, he would know it in ample time, for they would be brought out into the open where they would be tortured and killed for the edification of the assembled Bukina. Then he would have to do something about it. In the meantime, he would go closer where he could see and hear what transpired in the village. Tarzan goes into the village, he whispered to Nkima. If Nkima comes, he will make no noise. Does Nkima understand? No noise, no talk, repeated the monkey. Moving quietly through the trees, Tarzan circled the village, and close beside him, silent as he, moved little Nkima. At last the two came opposite the rear of the kraal. That part of the village seemed dark and deserted, for all were congregated in the wide street before the hut of Udalo, the chief. Tarzan dropped to the ground and moved toward the palisade. When a few paces from it, he sprang swiftly forward, leaped into the air, and ran up the barrier with all the agility of little Nkima, who followed close behind him. Then the two dropped silently into the shadows among the huts in the rear of the village. Creeping stealthily, noiseless as the shadow of a shadow, the two crept toward the hut of the chief. Separated biologically by countless ages, one a little monkey, the other a peer of England, yet there was little difference in the way they passed through the night and swung nimbly into the tree that overshadowed Udalo's hut. As Tarzan looked down at close range upon the dancing, shouting blacks, he realized that they had been partaking too freely of their native beer, and he knew that under such circumstances anything might happen. A big black, half-drunk, was haranguing Udalo. The man was evidently a sub-chief from another village. Bring out the carvaroo, he said, let us have a look at them, we'll give them a taste of what they are going to get tomorrow night. The others are not here, said Udalo, we should wait for the rest of the tribe. Bring them out, demanded another, we have not seen them, we want to see the carvaroo who steal our girls. Bring them out, shrieked a woman. They stole my daughter, let me burn out their eyes with a red-hot coal, that they may suffer as I have suffered. Then Tarzan heard the voice of a child. Do not harm the Waziri, she said, they are the friends of Tarzan, and Tarzan is a friend of the Bukina. He saved me from the carvaroo and brought me back to my village. You cannot trust the carvaroo or a demon, said Udalo. He turned to some of his warriors. Bring the prisoners, he said, but see that they are not killed tonight. Already Tarzan of the Apes was on the ground behind the hut of the chief. Here was an emergency. Every danger, every risk, must be faced without hesitation, boldly, after the manner of the Lord of the Jungle. He moved quickly to the hut where he had been confined, and as he stooped and entered it, his sensitive nostrils told him that the Waziri were there. Silence, he whispered, it is I, Tarzan. They are coming for you. I will cut your bonds. We will fall upon the warriors who come and take their weapons from them, bind and gag them, let them make no noise. Then bring them where Tarzan leads, to the rear of the chief's hut. He worked quickly as he talked, and when the 3 warriors came to fetch the prisoners, all of them were free and waiting in silence in the darkness. 15. A bit of cloth. Don't get it into your heads that you are going to hang me. There was a challenge in Brown's tone that sounded to Jane like the defiance of a guilty man, and yet she could not believe that it was he who had killed the Princess Sporove. We shall hang no one, she said. We cannot take the law into our own hands. We must all be equally under suspicion until a properly constituted court of law determines our guilt or innocence. There is but one thing to do. We must try to reach the nearest established civilized authority, tell our story, and let the law take its course. I quite agree with you, milady, said Tibbs. Well, I don't, grumbled Alexis. It wouldn't be safe to travel through this lonely country with a murderer who might easily kill all of us and thus dispose of all the witnesses who could testify against him. And what do you suggest? Asked Jane. That we leave the murderer here, make our way to the nearest post, report the affair, and leave it to the authorities to apprehend the guilty man and arrest him. Jane shook her head. But we don't know who the murderer is. In the eyes of the law, we are all equally suspects. No, the only proper thing to do is to find a magistrate or a commissioner, tell our story and request an investigation. Not for me, said Brown. I wouldn't have a chance in one of these foreign ports. There ain't anybody in Europe got any use for an American anyway, but they sure knuckle down to titles. What chance would an American without money have against a prince with millions? Nix, miss. There ain't nobody going to railroad my neck into a noose. You see, Jane, said Alexis, he practically admits his guilt. An innocent man would not be afraid to stand trial. Listen, miss, said Brown, turning appealingly to Jane, I ain't never bumped anyone off yet, but if you don't want another killing around here, make that fool shut up and keep shut up. Then you refuse to come with us, Brown? Demanded Jane. I think you are very foolish. I may be foolish, miss, but I ain't taking no chances with no foreign court. An English court might be all right, but we are not in English territory. No, I came out here with these people in the hopes I could get hold of that formula for perpetual youth. That would be worth millions back home, and now that I am here, I am going ahead and try to find it. I don't know how, but I am going to try. There are so few of us, said Jane, and we are so poorly armed that we really ought to stick together, at least until we contact some friendly natives. I didn't plan on leaving you cold, miss, said the pilot. I'll stick until you and Annette are safe. I was sure you would, Brown, and now that that's settled, we've something else to do, a very unpleasant duty. The princess must be buried. I guess you men will have to dig the grave. The only implement they had with which to dig was the hatchet that had been used to kill the princess, and thus a task, sufficiently gruesome in itself, was rendered incalculably more so. While one of the men loosened the earth with the hatchet, the other 2 scooped it out with their hands, and while the men were thus occupied, Jane and Annette prepared the body for burial as best they might by wrapping it in articles of the victim's clothing taken from her baggage. Annette wept continually, but Jane, even though she felt the loss infinitely more than the little French maid could have, remained dry-eyed. She had work to do, a duty to perform, and she could not permit her personal sorrow to interfere. When all was in readiness and the body lowered into the grave, Jane recited as much of the burial service as she could recall, while the others stood about with bowed heads, the men uncovered. I think, said Jane, when it was all over and the grave filled, that we had better break camp immediately. No one will want to remain here. Have you any plan? Asked Alexis. Do you know where we are going? There are only 2 things we can do, said Jane. One is to follow this trail toward the west, and the other is to follow it toward the east. The toss of a coin could decide that as intelligently as any of us. Not knowing where we are, it is impossible to know in which direction lies the nearest friendly village. Personally, I should prefer going toward the east because there lies the country with which I am familiar, the country where I have many friends among the natives. Then we go to the east, said Brown. Your boss, what you say goes. I doubt the wisdom of your decision, Jane, said Alexis. The Belgian Congo must lie to the west, if we are not already in it, which I believe, and in that event, we shall strike civilization sooner by going in that direction. It's all guesswork at best, Alexis, said Jane. It really doesn't make much difference which way we go. Let's leave it to a vote. How about you, Tibbs? I beg pardon, milady, I shall cast my lot with the majority. You're a lot of help, said Brown. And you, Annette? Asked Jane. Oh, if you and Mr. Brown wish to go to the east, I wish to go to the east also. That's settled, said Jane, we go to the east then. I still object, demurred Alexis. As the financial head of the expedition, the one who has paid and must pay all the bills, I believe that some consideration should be shown my wishes. Alexis, said Jane, you make it very difficult. Like the rest, you will have to follow my orders, or when there is a question, accept the will of the majority. As for financing the expedition, each of us has the necessary wherewithal if we care to use it, and it's not money, it's cooperation and loyalty, courage and endurance. Alexis had been watching her closely as she spoke, and suddenly his whole attitude changed. I am sorry, Jane, he said, I spoke thoughtlessly. You must understand that I am terribly upset by what has happened. I have lost my dear wife, and I am heartbroken. Brown turned away disgustedly and held his nose with a thumb and forefinger. All right, Alexis, said Jane. Now let's gather up what necessities we can carry and get going. How about breakfast? Demanded Brown. Oh, I had forgotten all about breakfast, said Jane. Well, it will have to be bushbuck again. I don't believe I can eat a mouthful, said Annette to Brown. Oh, yes you can, girlie, replied the pilot, you gotta eat whether you want it or not. We've probably got a lot of hard days ahead of us and we got to keep up our strength. I'll try, she said, for you. He squeezed her arm. And say, he said, you don't believe I done it, do you? No, Mr. Brown, I do not believe it. AW, can the Mr. girlie? All right, Neil, but I do not see how he could have done it. I do not see how a man could kill his wife. She was such a nice lady. Yeah, she was sort of nuts, but she was all right at that. She was a whole lot better than him. As a matter of fact, the old dame killed herself. What do you mean? How could she kill herself so horribly with a hatchet? Well, she done it all right. She done it when she told him she was going to change her will. Oh. What a terrible man. I've known of fellows that was bumped off for less than what this guy will get, said Brown. Back in the land of the free and the home of the brave, you can get it done to almost any guy for 100 smackers. 100 smackers? What is a smacker? My English, she is not so good. I've noticed that, kiddo, but don't worry, I'll learn you. Now I must cook the meat for our breakfast, said Annette, if you will cut off a few slices for me from the hind quarters. Sure. He felt in his pockets. Where's my knife? Oh, yes, I remember, and he turned to Jane. Say, miss, he called, let me have my knife if you are through with it. You haven't any knife, laughed Jane, but I'll loan you mine. Brown rubbed his chin. That's right, I did lose, didn't I? While Annette was cooking the antelope, the others busied themselves selecting such things as they thought they would need and could carry on the march. Tibbs was busy repacking suitcases under the direction of Alexis. Jane gathered her weapons together and then fastened a small handbag to the belt that supported her shorts. It was such a bag as a woman uses to carry her money, keys, lipstick, and such odds and ends. Other than this and her weapons, Jane selected nothing more than what she wore. Brown, who was wearing aviator's boots, chose to take along an extra pair of shoes and several pairs of socks. He also crammed the contents of a carton of cigarettes into various pockets and inside his shirt. These things, with a supply of matches, and the fateful hand axe, constituted his entire equipment. He knew the bitterness of heavy packs. As Annette grilled the meat over the coals, her eyes were attracted by something at the edge of the fire, among the cooling ashes. It was a bit of burned fabric to which 3 buttons remained attached. With a piece of stick, she turned it over. As it had been lying flat on the ground near the edge of the fire, the underneath portion of the fabric was not burned, the color and pattern remained. A look of recognition entered her eyes, then they half closed in brooding, speculative contemplation of her find. Brown wandered over toward the fire. "I'll finish the meat," he said. "You go and gather together what you are going to take." "I don't know what to take," said the girl. "I can't carry very much." "Take whatever you need, girlie," he said. "I'll help you carry the stuff. Take extra shoes if you have them and plenty of stockings and a warm wrap. Unless I'm mistaken, we are going to need a lot of shoes and stockings, especially you. Them things you are wearing was never meant to walk in no-how." "I have 2 pair of low-heeled shoes," said the girl. "Then throw them things away and take the low-heeled ones." "All right," she said, "I'll go and get my things together. While I am gone, you might like to look at this," and she touched the piece of burned fabric with the stick she was holding. Brown picked the thing up and looked at it, then he whistled as he raised his eyes to the person of Prince Alexis Burroughs. Annette walked away to make up her bundle. Tibbs was still busy packing. Jane was seated on a rotting log, deep in thought. Brown was whistling. He seemed very much pleased about something. Presently he looked up at the others. "Come and get it," he called. "Beg pardon," said Tibbs. "Come and get what?" "Chuck," explained Brown. "Chuck," sneered Burroughs. Jane rose. "I guess we eat," she said, "and after all, I am hungry. I didn't think I should be." They all gathered around the fire where Brown had laid strips of cooked meat on a little bed of clean twigs close beside the coals. "Come ahead, folks, pitch in," said Brown. "Tibbs," said Alexis, "you may fetch me a piece not too rare nor too well done, about medium." Brown looked up in undisguised disgust. He jabbed a stick into a piece of meat and tossed it at Alexis. "Here, Napoleon," he said, "we are sorry we ain't got no gold platters, but the keeper of the imperial pantry ran out on us and no one else ain't got no key." Alexis gave Brown a venomous look, but he picked up the sorry-looking piece of meat and took a bite of it. "This is terrible," he said. "It's burned on the outside and raw on the inside. My stomach will never be able to stand such cooking as this. I shall not eat it." "Well, ain't that just too bad," said Brown. "Let's all cry." "You better eat it, Alexis," said Jane. "You'll get awfully hungry before night." "Tibbs will prepare my food hereafter," said Alexis haughtily. "I shall eat apart." "That will suit me," Brown assured him, "and the farther apart, the better." Come," said Jane, "don't start that all over again, we've had enough of it." "Okay, miss," assented Brown, "but there is something I'd like to ask the Grand Duke. I noticed that he's changed his coat. That was a mighty nice coat he was wearing last night, and I thought if he wasn't going to use it no more, I'd like to buy it from him, that is, if nothing ain't happened to it." Alexis looked up quickly, his face paling. "I do not sell my old clothes," he said. When I am through with it, I'll give it to you. That's mighty nice of you, said Brown. May I see it now? I'd like to find out if it fits me. Not now, my man, it's packed with my other things. All of it, demanded Brown. All of it? What do you mean? Of course it's all packed. Well, here's one piece you forgot, mister, and Brown held up the charred remnant of the sleeve with the 3 buttons still remaining on it. Burroughs' face took on a ghastly hue, his eyes stared wildly at the bit of cloth, but almost as quickly he regained his self-possession. Some more American humor, he asked. That thing doesn't belong to me. It looks a powerful like the coat you was wearing last night, said Brown. Annette thinks so, too, but Tibbs ought to know, he's your valet. Ever see this before, Tibbs? The valet coughed. Come over and take a good look at it, said Brown. Tibbs approached and examined the piece of fabric carefully, turning it over and wiping the ashes from the buttons. When did you see that last, Tibbs? Demanded Brown. He glanced apprehensively at Burroughs. You're a liar, Tibbs, shouted the prince. I never had a coat like that, I never saw it before. It's not mine, I tell you. Tibbs didn't say nothing. Brown reminded him, he ain't opened his trap except to say He never said it was off your coat, but you're going to, ain't you, Tibbs? It looks very much like it, sir, replied the Englishman. Of course, I couldn't exactly take oath to it, seeing as how it's so badly burned. Brown turned his gaze upon Alexis. The blood must have spattered some when you hit her. Don't, screamed Alexis, my God. Don't. I never touched her, I tell you. Tell it to the judge, said Brown. You'd better hang on to that evidence, Annette, he added, the judge might like to know about that, too. Alexis had quickly gained control of himself. It was my coat, he said, someone stole it out of my luggage, it's what you call in America a frame. Let's leave this whole terrible matter to the courts, said Jane, it's not for us to try to decide, and constantly harping on it only makes our situation all the more bitter. Brown nodded. I guess you're right, miss, as usual. Very well, then. If you have all finished eating, we'll start. I've left a note stuck up in the shelter telling about our accident and the direction we are taking, and giving the names of all in the party, just on the chance, the very remote chance, that someone might pass this way someday, some white hunter who could take our message out in case we never get out ourselves. Are you all ready? All ready, said Alexis. Tibbs, my luggage. Tibbs walked over to where his small handbag, a large Gladstone, and 2 suitcases were stacked. Where's your luggage, Jane? Asked Alexis. Brown could carry that. I'm carrying my own, replied Jane, what little I'm taking. But you haven't any, said the prince. I am carrying all that I am going to take. We are not traveling deluxe. They were all standing silently watching Tibbs trying to gather up the 4 pieces of baggage so that he could carry them. Beg pardon, sir, he said, but if I may make so bold as to say so, I don't think that I can carry them all. Well, let Annette carry that small bag of yours, then. You certainly ought to be able to manage 3 pieces. I've seen porters carry twice that much. Not across Africa, said Jane. Well, said Alexis, I've only brought along what I actually need, I've left nearly all of my stuff behind. Tibbs will have to manage somehow. If Brown were the right sort he'd help him. Only by the exercise of all his willpower had Brown remained silent, but now he exploded. Listen, mister, he said, I ain't going to carry none of your stuff, and neither is Annette, and if Tibbs does, he's a damned fool. I fancy I rather agree with you, Mr. Brown, said Tibbs, and dropped all three of the pieces of baggage. What? Demanded Alexis. You refuse to carry my luggage? Why, you impudent upstart, I'll. No, you won't, sir, said Tibbs. I know just what you are going to say, sir, if I may make so bold as to say so, but it won't be necessary, sir. He drew himself up haughtily. I am giving notice, sir, I am leaving your employ now, immediately. Lady Greystoke, said Alexis, with great dignity, you have assumed command here. I demand that you compel these people to carry my luggage. Nonsense, said Jane. Take an extra pair of shoes and some socks and whatever else you can carry, and come along. We can't waste any more time here. And thus the unhappy party started upon the trail toward the east. They had had but two guesses, and they had guessed wrong, but fortunately they could not know the dangers and the terrors that lay ahead of them on the trail toward the east. 16. The message. Three Bukina warriors crept into the hut where Tarzan and the 10 Waziri warriors lay waiting for them in silence. As the last of the three entered, Tarzan leaped upon him. Powerful fingers closed about the fellow's throat, and simultaneously the other two were dragged down by Muviro and a couple of his warriors. There was no outcry, there was only the subdued sound of the shuffling feet of struggling men, and that for but a moment. Quickly the three were bound and gagged, then the Waziri, headed by Tarzan, carried them to the tree beside the chief's hut, where a corner of the latter concealed them from the sight of the drunken natives assembled in the street in front. Shouldering one of the warriors, Tarzan swarmed up into the tree, then after he had deposited his burden safely where it would not fall, the Waziri handed the other two up to him. Taking his victims up into the denser foliage where they would not be visible from the ground, Tarzan laid them side by side across the huge branch that projected out over the Negroes assembled below. Tarzan ran his rope through the bonds that encircled the ankles of one of the prisoners. Then he removed the gag from the fellow's mouth and lowered him, head foremost, toward the ground, but before the fellow's head broke through the foliage and came in sight of those below, Tarzan voiced the warning cry of the bull ape. Instantly the dancing stopped, the natives looked around them in evident terror. The sound was very close, it seemed right beside them, but as yet they had been unable to locate it. Silence followed, and then the head of one of their fellows broke through the foliage above them, and slowly his body descended. The blacks were already on the verge of panic, for this was a mysterious, supernatural occurrence for which they could find no explanation in their past experience, yet they hesitated, perhaps fascinated and momentarily incapable of movement. The deep voice rang out above them. I am Tarzan of the Apes. Let those beware who would harm Tarzan or his Waziri. Open the gates and let my people go in peace, or many of you shall die by the hand of Tarzan. The victim hanging head downward found his tongue. Open the gates, he screamed. Let them go before they kill me. Still the blacks hesitated. The time is short, said Tarzan, and then he started to drag the warrior back up into the tree again. Do you promise that none of us will be harmed if we open the gates? Demanded Udalo. None will be harmed if you open the gates and let us go in peace, returning their weapons to my Waziri. It shall be done, said Udalo. Fetch the weapons of the Waziri, open the gates, let them go, and may they never return. Tarzan drew the warrior back up into the tree and laid him beside his fellows. Keep still, he warned them, and I shall kill none of you. Then he dropped to the ground and joined the Waziri. Fearlessly they walked around the end of the hut, and the blacks gave way fearfully, opening a path before them. Some little boys ran timidly forward with their weapons, for the warriors had not dared to do so. The gates were opened, and Tarzan led his Waziri toward them. Where are my 3 warriors? Demanded Udalo. You have not kept your word. You will find your 3 warriors alive in the tree above your hut, replied the ape man. He halted and turned toward the chief. And now, Udalo, when strangers come to your kraal, treat them well, and especially Tarzan and the Waziri. A moment later the black jungle night beyond the palisade had swallowed them. Little Nika, the daughter of Gupingu, the witch doctor, danced up and down and clapped her hands. "It is he," she cried. "It is the white warrior who saved me. I am glad that he and his Waziri got away before we killed them. I told you not to do it." "Shut up," cried Udalo, "and go to your hut. I never want to hear that white man spoken of again." "I thought that it was the end," said Muviro, as they crossed the clearing toward the forest. "Thanks to Nkima's bad memory, it came very near being the end," replied the ape man. Then he voiced a strange, weird note, and an answer came from the blackness of the jungle trees. "He is still there," said the ape man to Muviro. "Hurry, hurry," cried the monkey. "Little Nkima is fighting with Shieta, the panther. He is beating him on the head with a stick, he is pounding him on the nose. Shieta is very frightened." Tarzan grinned and walked on slowly through the forest, and when he came under the first tree, the little monkey dropped down upon his shoulder. "Where is Shieta?" demanded Tarzan. Little Nkima beat him so hard on the face that he ran away. "Little Nkima is very brave," said the ape man. "Yes," replied the monkey, "Little Nkima is a mighty fighter, a mighty hunter." The following day, Tarzan and the Waziri moved slowly toward the north, resting often, for the latter were still suffering from the effects of the drug that had been administered to them by Gupingu, the witch doctor. Finally, when Tarzan realized their condition more fully, he ordered a halt, and the party went into camp upon the banks of a river. As time had never been a matter of consequence to the ape man, delays, except in cases of immediate emergency, gave him no concern. He could wait there for 1 day, or 2 days, or as long as was necessary while his warriors recuperated, nor would he leave them while they needed someone to hunt for them. He made them rest therefore while he foraged for food. The day after they had left the village of Udalo, a lone warrior trotted into the clearing and approached the gates of the kraal. The white plume of the Waziri waved above his head, and in his hand he carried a split stick, in the end of which an envelope was inserted. When warriors met him at the gates, he asked to see the chief, and they took him to Udalo, but not without misgivings, for he bore a marked resemblance to the 10 prisoners who had escaped them. Udalo eyed the warrior sullenly. "Who are you?" he demanded, "and what do you want in the village of Udalo?" "I am a Waziri," replied the man. "I bear a message for the big Bwana, Tarzan. The sun has risen many times since he left his country to come here in search of the Kavuru. I have followed to bring this message to him. Have you seen him?" "He has been here, but he has gone," said Udalo, sullenly. "When did he go, and in which direction?" asked the messenger. "He went away yesterday with 10 Waziri warriors. They took the trail toward the north. You will follow him?" "Yes." "I will give you food before you go, and when you find Tarzan tell him that Udalo treated you well." The fear of the Lord of the Jungle was in the heart of Udalo, the chief. It was midday of the following day. The Waziri lay resting in their camp beside the river. Tarzan squatted at the base of a tree fashioning arrows for his quiver. Little Nkima perched upon one of his shoulders, busily occupied by that age-old simian pastime of searching for fleas upon his belly. He was vastly contented. Presently the ape-man raised his head and looked toward the south where the trail debouched upon the clearing where they were encamped. "Someone comes," he said. The Waziri stirred themselves. Some of them seized their weapons and started to rise, but Tarzan reassured them. "There is no danger," he said, "there is only one. He comes boldly, and not by stealth." "Who could it be?" asked Muviro. We have seen no one in all this lonely country since we left the Bukina village. The ape man shrugged. We shall have to wait, he said, until our eyes tell us, for he is downwind from us. Little Nkima, noting the listening attitudes of the others, abandoned the pursuit of a singularly notable specimen and, following the example of the Waziri, stared intently toward the south. Something comes, he asked Tarzan. Yes. Little Nkima slipped quickly down behind Tarzan's back, and peered anxiously across his left shoulder. Something is coming to eat Little Nkima, he demanded. He glanced up into the tree behind him, gauging the distance to the lowest branch, and debated in his little mind the wisdom of discretion. However, feeling reasonably safe in his present sanctuary, he stood his ground, and a moment later a lone warrior trotted into the clearing. At sight of the party encamped there, he voiced his pleasure in a series of savage whoops, and the Waziri returned his greeting in kind, for he was the runner bearing a message for Tarzan. As he came forward with the message in the split stick to deliver it to Tarzan, Little Nkima evinced great interest, and as the message was handed to his master he seized the stick and commenced to scold and jabber when Tarzan took the envelope from it. The ape man removed the message and dropped the envelope to the ground, whereupon Little Nkima sprang upon it and occupied himself in a futile endeavor to make it remain upright on the end of the stick as the messenger had carried it. The Waziri were looking expectantly at Tarzan as he read the message, for messages delivered in the depths of the forest were rare indeed. As he read, Tarzan's brow clouded, and when he had finished he turned to Muviro. There is bad news, Bwana, asked the black. The Mem Sahib left London for Nairobi in an aeroplane, he said. That was just before the big storm. You remember, Muviro, that after the storm broke we heard an aeroplane circling above? Yes, Bwana. We thought then that it was in great danger. Perhaps that was the ship in which the Mem Sahib rode. It went away, Muviro reminded him, and we did not hear it again. Perhaps it went on to Nairobi. Perhaps, said the ape man, but it was a very bad storm and the pilot was lost. Either that, or he was in trouble and looking for a landing place, otherwise he would not have been circling as he was. For some time Tarzan sat in thought, and then the silence was broken by Muviro. You will go back at once to Nairobi, Bwana, he asked. What good would it do? Asked the ape man. If they reached Nairobi, she is safe. If they did not, where might I search? In an hour an aeroplane might fly as far as one could travel on the ground in a day. Perhaps, if they had trouble, it flew for many hours after we heard it before it came down, and if the pilot were lost, there is no telling in what direction it went. The chances are that I should never find it. Even if I did, it would be too late. Then, too, it may as easily be that it came down in the direction we are going as in any other direction. Then we may continue to search for my daughter, Bwira, asked Muviro. Yes, said Tarzan. As soon as you are rested and well again, we shall go on toward the country of the Kavuru. Little Nkima was becoming more and more excited and irritable. Notwithstanding all his efforts, the envelope would not remain upright upon the end of the stick. He chattered and scolded, but it availed him nothing, and then Tarzan noticed him, and taking the stick from him spread the slit end open and inserted the envelope. Nkima watched him intently, his head cocked upon one side. Tarzan repeated the operation several times, and then he handed the envelope and the stick to Nkima. An adept in mimicry, the monkey reenacted all that he had watched Tarzan do, and after a few trials succeeded in inserting the envelope into the end of the stick. His achievement filled him with enthusiasm and pride. Jabbering excitedly, he leaped from Waziri to Waziri until all had examined the marvel that Little Nkima had wrought, nor did his excitement soon subside, and in the exuberance of his spirits he went racing through the trees clinging tightly to the stick that bore the envelope in its end. Tarzan and the Waziri laughed at his antics. Little Nkima is proud because he has learned a new trick, said one. He thinks now he is a great witch doctor among the monkeys, said Muviro. It is like many of the useless things that man learns, said Tarzan. It will never do him nor anyone else any good, but if it makes him happy, that is enough. For 3 days more the Waziri rested, and then Muviro said that they were ready to continue on toward the north. In the meantime, Tarzan had dispatched the runner back to Nairobi with a message for Jane and also one to the authorities there, asking them to make a search for the ship in the event that it had not already arrived. Little Nkima was still intrigued by his new accomplishment. He would sit for an hour at a time taking the envelope out of the stick and putting it back in, and he never permitted it out of his possession. Wherever he went, he carried the stick and the envelope with him. Having been several days in this camp, and having seen no danger, Nkima, always restless, had formed the habit of wandering farther and farther away. He found some other little monkeys of his own species with whom he tried to make friends, but in this he succeeded only partially. The males bared their teeth and chattered at him, scolding, and sometimes when he came too close, they chased him away. But handicapped though he was by his stick and his envelope, he always succeeded in eluding them, for Nkima was an adept in escaping danger. But there was one who did not bare her teeth and scold. However, it was difficult for Nkima to find her when there was not an old male hanging around, and old males can be very disagreeable. This last day in camp, however, he was more successful. He discovered her some little distance from her fellows. The young lady was coy. She did not repulse him, but she led Nkima a merry chase through the trees. It was all in fun, and they were enjoying it greatly, for she was not really trying to escape from Nkima, nor was he seriously intent upon capturing her, for he knew that eventually she would stop and let him come close. And so, thoughtless of time or direction or distance, they swung through the trees, a little lady monkey and Nkima with his stick and his envelope. They had had a glorious time and thoroughly understood one another when the little lady finally came to rest upon a broad branch. That they might permanently cement this friendship, each was soon searching for what he might find upon the head of the other, and certainly that is almost the last word in intimacy, the final proof of trust and confidence and friendship. They were very happy, and only once did a shadow momentarily becloud this bliss. That was when the young lady sought to snatch the stick and envelope from Nkima. He bared his teeth in a terrible grimace, and gave her a resounding box on one of her shell-like ears. She lowered her head sheepishly then and cuddled closer to him, and it was plain to see that she liked this dominant male and his caveman tactics. What a day for little Nkima! They hunted for fruit and nuts, they ate together, they scampered through the trees, they sat enfolded in each other's arms, and little Nkima was entirely unaware that Tarzan and the Waziri had broken camp and started north again. Perhaps if he had known, it would have made no difference at the moment, for the alchemy of love works strange metamorphoses in the minds of its victims. To their consternation, while they were still far away, night overtook them, and they were afraid to return through the menacing darkness of the glowering forest. They were afraid, but they were happy, and when the moon rose it looked down upon two little monkeys clutched tightly in each other's arms. Above their heads rose a little stick bearing an envelope in its split end. 17. The Snake. It was with feelings of relief that the five left the scene of the tragedy that had cast a pall of gloom and horror over them, and while the future held out little of encouragement to them, the very fact of being on the move raised their spirits to some extent. Brown had insisted upon marching at the head of the little column, and Jane had acceded to his request. Annette stayed as close to Brown as she could. Jane brought up the rear and Alexis walked with her. Tibbs plodded along behind Annette. Either because he tired more quickly than the others, or because he wanted to get out of earshot of those whom he considered servants and beneath him, Alexis lagged. "We shouldn't fall so far behind the others," said Jane. "We must not become separated. You will have to walk a little faster, Alexis." Her tone was just a little impatient. "I thought it would be nice for us to be alone together, Jane," he said. "You see, You and I have nothing in common with those others, and it must be as much of a relief to you as to me to have the companionship of one of your own class. You will have to get over that, said Jane. There are no class distinctions here. I am afraid you do not like me, dear lady. You have been very annoying at times, Alexis. I have been terribly upset, he replied, and most of all by you. By me? What have I done? It is not that you have done anything, it is just that you are you. Can't you understand, Jane? Haven't you noticed? Noticed what? From the first, you attracted me strangely. There seemed to be no hope, though, and I was desperately blue, but now I am free, Jane. He seized her hand. Oh, Jane, can't you like me a little? She jerked her hand from his. You fool, she exclaimed. His eyes narrowed menacingly. You are going to regret that, he said. I tell you I'm in love with you, madly in love. I'm desperate, and I won't stand idly by and see an illiterate aeroplane pilot get the woman I want. Just what do you mean by that? The girl's eyes and voice were level and cold. It's too obvious to need explanation. Anyone can see that you are in love with Brown. Alexis, did you ever hear a man referred to as an unspeakable cad? I have, but until this minute I never knew what it meant. I never could have conceived the sort of man it describes until now. Move on now. Get away from me. Get up there with Tibbs. Instantly his manner changed. Oh, Jane, he pleaded, please don't send me away. I don't know why I ever said that, I was just mad with jealousy. Can't you understand that it is because I love you so? Can't you understand and forgive me? She made no reply but started ahead, increasing her gait to overtake the others. Wait, he exclaimed, huskily. You've got to listen to me. I'm not going to give you up. He seized her by the arm and pulled her toward him, endeavoring to throw his arms about her. Then she struck him, and, jumping back, leveled her spear to hold him off. For a moment they stood there facing one another in silence, and in that moment she saw something in his eyes, in the expression on his face, that made her fear him for the first time. She knew then how really dangerous he was, and it was no longer difficult for her to believe that he had murdered his wife. Go up there now as I told you, she said, or I will kill you. There is no law here but the law of the jungle. Perhaps he, too, read something in her narrowed lids and icy tone, for he did as she bid, and went on ahead of her in silence. By mid-afternoon, Tibbs and Alexis and Annette were almost exhausted, and when the party reached a favorable spot, Jane called a halt. The trail by which they had come had followed the meanderings of the stream upon which they had been camped, and thus the water problem had been solved for them. What now, miss? Demanded Brown. Hadn't we better rustle some grub? Yes, she replied. I'll go out and see what I can bring in. I'm going to have a look-see myself, said Brown. We can go in different directions and maybe one of us will find something. All right. You go on up the trail, and I'll take to the trees and follow the river. I may run across a drinking hole. She turned to the others. And while we are gone, the rest of you can be building a boma and gathering firewood. All right, Brown, let's get going. The three that remained in camp seemed physically unable to drag themselves to their feet, but Alexis was resourceful. Tibbs, he said, go out and gather material for the boma and get some firewood. Motivated by years of servile obedience, the Englishman rose painfully to his feet and started away. I'll help you, Tibbs, said Annette, and started to rise. Alexis laid a restraining hand on her arm. Wait, he said, I want to talk with you. But we must help Tibbs. He can do very nicely by himself. You wait here. What do you want? Prince Sporove. I've got to go and help Tibbs. Listen, my dear, said Alexis, how would you like to have 100,000 francs? The girl shrugged. Who would not like to have 100,000 francs, she demanded. Very well, you can earn them, and very easily. And how? Her tone was skeptical. You have something that I wish. I will pay you 100,000 francs for it, you know what it is. You mean the burned sleeve of your coat, Prince Alexis? You won't let them frame me, Annette? You won't let them send me to the guillotine for something I didn't do. When everybody in this party hates me, they will all lie about me, and when they bring that piece of burned cloth into court, I shall be convicted in spite of my innocence. Give it to me. No one need ever know. You can say that you lost it, and as soon as we get back to civilization I will give you 100,000 francs. The girl shook her head. No, I could not do that. It may be all that will save Mr. Brown. You are wasting your time on Brown, he said, nastily. You think he loves you, but he doesn't. Don't be fooled. The girl flushed. I have not said that he loves me. Well, you think so, and he's trying to make you think so, but if you knew what I know, you wouldn't be so anxious to save his worthless head. I do not know what you mean. I do not care to talk about it any more. I will not give you the piece of cloth. Well, I'll tell you what I mean, you little fool, snapped Alexis. Brown's in love with Lady Greystoke, and she's in love with him. What do you suppose they've gone off into the jungle for? Why, to meet each other, of course. I do not believe it, said Annette. I will not listen to any more. She started to rise, and as she did so, he leaped to his feet and seized her. Give me that piece of cloth, he demanded, in a hoarse whisper. The fingers of his right hand encircled her throat. Give it to me or I'll kill you, you little fool. Quick as a cat, and with surprising strength, she tore herself away from him and screamed. Help, Tibbs! Help, she cried. The Englishman had not gone far, and he came running back. If you tell on me, cried Sporove in a low whisper, I'll kill you. I'll kill you as I killed her. Annette looked into his eyes, as Jane had, and was frightened. What's wrong, sir? Demanded Tibbs, as he approached them. It wasn't anything, said Alexis, with a laugh. Annette thought she saw a snake. I did see a snake, she said. Well, it's all right now, Tibbs, said Alexis, you can go back to your work. I shall need a little help, sir, said the Englishman. I cannot do it all alone. I'll come with you, Tibbs, said Annette. Alexis followed them. He walked very close to Annette and whispered, remember, if you tell them. I don't fancy having a snake around the camp, said Tibbs, the nasty beggars. I don't like 'em. Neither do I, said Annette, but I won't be afraid when Mr. Brown comes back. If a snake tries to harm me then, he will kill it. She did not look at Tibbs as she spoke, although she seemed to be addressing him, but at Alexis. I think I would not tell the others about the snake, said Sporove, it might frighten Lady Greystoke. My word, sir, I don't believe she's afraid of anything, sir. Nevertheless, see that you don't mention it, cautioned Alexis. Why, here's Mr. Brown now, cried Tibbs. He's running. Something must have happened. What's wrong? Demanded Brown. I heard someone scream. Was that you, Annette? Annette saw a snake, said Alexis. Did you not, Annette? Where is it? Asked Brown. Did you kill it? No, replied the girl, I had nothing with which to kill it, but if it frightens me again, you will kill it. You bet your life I will, girlie. Where is it now? It got away, said Alexis. Annette looked straight into his eyes. Next time it will not get away, she said. Brown's pockets were bulging with fruit which he took out and laid on the ground. I hope this ain't poison, he said. I had a heck of a time getting it. Lady Greystoke will know whether or not we can eat it. Here she comes now, said Annette. What luck, Jane? Asked Alexis. Not so good, she replied, just a little fruit. I didn't see any game. Her eyes fell on the fruit that Brown had gathered. Oh, you found the same thing, she said. Well, it won't taste very good, but it's safe and it's food. I thought I heard a scream a few moments ago. Did any of you hear it? It was Annette, said Brown. She's seen a snake. Jane laughed. Oh, before Annette gets out of Africa, she'll be used to snakes. Not this one, said the girl. A puzzled expression crossed Brown's face. He started to speak, and then evidently thinking better of it remained silent. Not much had been accomplished toward the building of the boma and collecting the firewood, so Jane and Brown lent a hand in the work which moved much more rapidly with the aid of the hand axe. It was dark before the work was completed, and then they felt that they could take their ease around the fire that Jane had built. Jane showed them how they might make the fruit that constituted their sole food supply more palatable by roasting it on the end of a stick. So hungry were they that even Sporove ate without complaining, and as they ate, a pair of eyes watched them from behind the concealing foliage of a nearby tree. Brown had insisted that the three men assume the duty of guarding the camp, and though Jane and Annette insisted upon doing their share, the pilot was firm in respect to this matter and would not be moved. 2 hours on and 4 off won't hurt nobody, he insisted, and you girls are going to need all the sleep you can get if you're going to keep up with us. The statement made Jane smile, for she knew that she could endure more than any of them, not excepting Brown, but she appreciated the spirit that animated him, and knowing how jealous men are of their protective prerogative, she bowed to his will rather than offend him. The three men matched coins to determine the order in which they should stand guard. I wish you'd let me be a sentry, said Annette. No, that ain't no work for a girl, said Brown. Oh, please, Neil, just once, she begged. Oh, please. Nothing doing. Oh, just one little hour. You are on from 2 to 4, Neil. Wake me at 4 and let me stand guard until 5. Then I will wake the prince. It will be almost morning, anyway. Let her do it, if she wants to, said Jane. All right, said Brown, but it ain't going to be the regular thing. All were stretched out around the fire, apparently sleeping, when Tibbs woke Brown for his first tour of duty at 8 o'clock. Tibbs was so exhausted that he was asleep almost as soon as he lay down. Then Annette raised on one elbow and looked around. A moment later she came over and sat down beside Brown. You better get back to bed, kid, he said. I just wanted to talk with you for a minute, Neil, she said. What's on your mind, girlie? She was silent for a moment. Oh, nothing in particular, she replied. I like to be alone with you, that is all. He put an arm about her and pressed her closer, and thus they sat in silence for a moment before Brown spoke again. You know, I've been thinking a lot about that snake business, Annette, he said. It sounded sort of fishy to me. You sure you wasn't stringing me? Stringing? I don't know what stringing is. Well, skip it. I seen funny looks pass between you and the Grand Duke when you was handing me that line about snakes. On the level now, kiddo, give me the lowdown. The lowdown. The facts, truth. What was it all about? I am so afraid of him, Neil. Promise me that you won't tell him that I told you. I think of what he did to her. he would do the same to me, he said so. What? He said he'd kill you? If I told. If you told what? That he had tried to take that piece of coat sleeve away from me. That was when you screamed, he asked. Yes. I'll get him for that, said Brown. Please don't say anything about it, please promise me, she begged. Only don't leave me alone with him again. All right, then, he promised, but if he ever makes another break like that, I'll sure get him. You needn't be afraid of him. I am not afraid when you are with me. I do not know what I should do if it were not for you. You like me a little, kid. I like you a great deal, Neil. He pressed her closer to him. I guess I like you a lot, too, more than I ever liked anyone else. She nestled closer to him. Tell me how much that is, she whispered. I'm not much good at saying things like that. Well, you know what I mean. I want to hear you say it. He cleared his throat. Well, I love you, kid. And you don't love Lady Greystoke? Eh? What? He exclaimed. What put that into your head? He said so, he said that you loved her, and that she loved you. The dirty rat. Imagine that dame, the wife of an English viscount, falling for me. That is to laugh. But you might, what you call it, fall for her. Not on your life, kid, not while I've got you. She put her arms around his neck and drew him down toward her. I love you, Neil, she murmured, before their lips met. They felt that they had the night and the world to themselves, but that was because they were not aware of the silent watcher in the tree above them. She sat with him until he awoke Sporove. The camp was sleeping soundly when Tibbs finished his tour of duty at 2 a.m. and called Brown again. At 4 Brown hesitated to awaken Annette, but he had given his word that she might stand guard for an hour, so he shook her gently. It's 4 o'clock and all's well, he whispered. Then he kissed her ear. And now it's better. She raised herself to an elbow, laughing. Now you lie down and sleep, she said, and I'll stand guard. I'll sit along with you for a while, he said. No, that was not in the bargain, she insisted. I want to watch alone. I shall feel very important. Go on, and go to sleep. Then quiet fell upon the camp, a quiet that was unbroken until Jane awoke after daylight. She sat up and looked about her. No one was on guard. Alexis, who should have been, was fast asleep. Come on, sleepyheads, she cried, it's time to get up. Brown sat up sleepily and looked around. He saw Alexis just awakening. I thought the Grand Duke was on guard, said Brown. Did you take his place? There wasn't anyone on guard when I woke up, said Jane, and then she noticed. Where is Annette? Brown sprang to his feet. Annette, he cried. There was no answer. Annette was gone. 18. A bit of paper. When morning broke, Nkima, had he been a man, would have said that he had not slept a wink all night, but that was because when he was awake he was so worried and frightened that the time had dragged interminably. During the night, he regretted that he had not stayed with Tarzan and determined to return to the camp the first thing in the morning, but when morning came, dispelling the gloom with brilliant sunshine, his little monkey mind forgot its good resolution and concerned itself only with the moment and his new playmate. Off they went, racing through the jungle, swinging from limb to limb, scampering high aloft, dropping again to lower levels. Nkima was very happy. The sun was shining. It would always shine. He could not envision that another night of cold and dread was coming quickly. Farther and farther toward the west they scampered, farther and farther away from camp, and in one hand Nkima clutched the little stick with the split end, topped by the soiled and crumpled envelope. Through all the playing and the lovemaking and the long night, little Nkima had clung to his sole treasure. The little she, who was Nkima's playmate, was mischievous. She was also covetous. For long had she looked upon the stick and the envelope with envy, but she had been cuffed once for trying to take them, so she was wary, yet the more she saw them, the more she wished them. Nkima was running along a branch holding the envelope on high. The little she was following in his wake when she saw her chance, just ahead, a limb beneath which Nkima would have to pass. Quickly she sprang upward and raced ahead along this limb, and, as Nkima passed beneath her, she reached down and seized the envelope. She was disappointed because she did not get the stick, too, but even a part of this wonderful thing was better than nothing. Having achieved her design, she scampered on ahead as fast as she could go. Nkima witnessed the theft, and his heart was filled with righteous anger and indignation. He pursued her, but fear lent her a new speed. On they raced, but the little she always seemed to have the advantage, for she steadily outdistanced Nkima until she was lost to his sight, and then his indignation and sorrow at the loss of his treasure was submerged in a fear that he had lost the little she also. But he had not. He came upon her perched innocently in a high-flung crotch, contentedly eating a piece of fruit. As Nkima approached her, he looked for the envelope. It was gone. He wanted to pound her, but he also wanted to hug her, so he compromised by hugging her. He asked for his bit of paper. Of course, he had no name for it, but he made her understand. It seemed that she had become frightened and thrown it away. Nkima went back a little way to look for it, but he became interested in some fuzzy caterpillars that he passed on the way, and when he had eaten all that he could find, he had temporarily forgotten the paper. A little river flowed beneath them. Rivers always intrigued Nkima. He liked to follow them, so he followed this one. Presently he espied something that brought him to a sudden stop. In a small, natural clearing on the bank of the river was a flimsy man-made hut. Nkima thought that there must be Gomangani around, and he was wary, but he was also very curious. He watched and listened. The place seemed deserted. Finally he mustered sufficient courage to drop to the ground and investigate. Followed by the little she, he crept toward the entrance to the hut. Cautiously he peeked around a corner of the door frame and peered within. There was no one there. Nkima entered. Luggage and clothing were strewn about the floor. He looked things over, seeking what he might appropriate. Then his eyes fell upon a piece of paper fastened to the wall with a sliver of wood. With a yelp of delight, Nkima leaped for it. Then he scampered out of the hut with his prize, raced across the clearing, and swarmed up to the topmost branches of a giant tree. Behind him came the little she. By the time Nkima had succeeded in inserting the piece of paper in the notch at the end of the stick, his interest in the other things that he had seen in the hut had, monkey-like, waned. Now he recalled the tall warrior who had brought the piece of paper in the end of the stick to Tarzan. Nkima decided that he would do likewise. He felt very important and was only sorry that he did not have a white plume to wave above his head. Holding to this single idea for an unusually long time, Nkima raced back in the direction of the camp where he had left Tarzan and the Waziri. It was late in the afternoon when he got there, and his little heart leaped into his throat when he discovered that his friends were gone. He was very sad and a little frightened, although it was not yet dark, but when his lady friend came and sat close beside him, he felt better. Unfortunately, this respite from despair was all too brief. The little band of monkeys to which his playmate belonged came trooping through the trees. They saw Nkima and the shameless young creature who had run away with him. Jabbering, chattering, scolding, several of the males of the clan came swinging through the trees toward Nkima and his light of love. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, Nkima had visions of standing his ground and doing battle, but the leading male was an old fellow, very large and strong. His fangs were bared in a most disconcerting manner, and he voiced terrifying threats that made Nkima's heart quail, so that on second thought he determined to go elsewhere and go quickly, but his lady friend clung to him tightly, hampering his movements, for she, too, was frightened. Perhaps she did not want to lose Nkima who, after all, had a way with him. The terrifying old monkey was approaching rapidly, and then Nkima did a most ungallant thing. He struggled to free himself from the lady's embrace, and when she only clung more tightly he tore at her arms to disengage himself, and then struck her in the face until she finally released him. By now, Nkima was screaming in terror. The little she was screaming, and so were all the other monkeys. Bedlam reigned in the jungle, and to the accompaniment of this din of rage and terror, little Nkima broke away and fled, but through it all he had clung to his stick with its fluttering bit of paper, and now toward the north he bore it away like a banner, but scarcely triumphantly. Some of the males pursued him for a short distance, but when terror impelled little Nkima only a bird on the wing might hope to overtake him, and so his pursuers soon gave up the chase. For some time thereafter, Nkima did not reduce his speed, he continued to flee, screaming at the top of his voice. It was only after he had almost reached the point of exhaustion that he slowed down and looked back, listening. In his mind's eye was the picture of the snarling visage of the old male, but he was nowhere to be seen, nor was there any sound of pursuit, so little Nkima took heart and his courage commenced to return. He even swaggered a little as though he were returning triumphant from a well-earned victory. Had he had a wife, he would have gone home to her and bragged of his exploits. There are men like that, so who may censure little Nkima who was only a monkey. Presently he found the trail of Tarzan and the Waziri. He knew that they had been traveling north, and so he came down and sniffed the earth in the game trail that they had been following. Clear in his nostrils was the scent spoor of his friends. This heartened him, and he hurried on again. Little Nkima moved through the trees many times faster than a man on foot. His fear of the coming jungle night held him to his purpose, so that he did not stop along the way to chase butterflies and birds. That night he perched high among the smaller branches where Shieta, the panther, cannot go. 19. Hate and Lust. Tihi's discovery that Annette was missing from the camp momentarily stunned the remaining members of the ill-fated expedition. What could possibly have become of her? Demanded Jane. I know that she wouldn't just have wandered off into the jungle. She was too much afraid of it. Brown advanced slowly upon Sporov. There was murder in his heart and it was reflected in his eyes. You know where she is, you rat, he said. Tell me what you've done with her. Sporov fell back, instinctively raising his hands in defense. I know nothing about her, he said, I was asleep. You lie, said Brown, still advancing. Keep away from me, cried Sporov, don't let him get me, Jane, he'll kill me. You're right, I'm going to kill you, growled Brown. It was then that Sporov turned and ran. Brown sprang forward. In a dozen steps he had overtaken the terrified man and seized him by the shoulder. Screaming, Sporov willed to fight with all the mad ferocity of the cornered rat fighting for its life. He pounded and scratched and bit, but the American bore him to the ground and closed his fingers upon his throat. Where is she? Demanded the American. Where is she, you? I don't know, gasped Sporov. As God is my judge, I don't know. If you don't know, you might as well be killed anyway, for you ain't no good for anything then nohow. Brown's fingers tightened upon the throat of the terrified Sporov, who still struggled and fought furiously to free himself. All that it takes so long to tell happened in the span of a few brief seconds. Nor during this time was Jane idle. The instant that she realized the gravity of the situation and that Brown was really intent upon destroying Sporov, she seized her spear and ran toward them. Stop it, Brown, she commanded. Let the prince up. Not till I've given him what's coming to him, cried the pilot, and he's going to get it, even if I hang for it. Jane placed the point of her spear beneath Brown's left shoulder blade and pushed until he felt the sharp point against his flesh. "Drop him, Brown," demanded Jane, "or I'll run this spear straight through your heart." "What do you want to kill me for, miss?" demanded Brown. "You need me." "I don't want to kill you, Brown," she said, "but that fact won't do you any good unless you obey my command and remember that I am leader of this expedition. You are doing a foolish thing, Brown. You haven't any evidence to uphold your judgment. Remember, we haven't made the slightest investigation. We should do that first to determine the direction in which Annette left camp, and whether she left alone or was accompanied by another. We can also tell by examining the spoor if she went willingly or was taken by force." Slowly Brown's fingers relaxed upon the throat of the struggling, gasping prince, then he released him and rose slowly to his feet. "I guess you're right, miss," he said, "you're always right, but poor little Annette, what she told me yesterday about that rat made me see red." "What did she tell you?" asked Jane. "He waylaid her yesterday and tried to take that piece of coat sleeve away from her, and then he threatened to kill her if she told. It wasn't no snake that made her scream yesterday, miss, leastways not an honest-to-God respectable snake, it was him. She was terribly afraid of him, miss." Alexis was gasping his breath back slowly. He was trembling from head to foot from terror. "Is this true, Alexis?" demanded Jane. "No," he gasped. "I just asked her for the coat sleeve so that I could see if it was really mine, and she commenced to scream just to get me in trouble. She did it just for spite." "Well," said Jane, "we're not accomplishing anything this way. The rest of you stay where you are while I look for some kind of tracks. If we all wander around looking for them, we'll obliterate any that there may be." She started to circle the camp slowly, examining the ground carefully. "Here they are," she said presently. She walked out this way, and she went alone. Jane walked slowly for a few yards, following the footprints of the missing girl, then she stopped. "They end here," she said, "right under this tree. There is no indication of a struggle, no sign that she was forced. As a matter of fact, she walked very slowly. There are no other footprints near hers. It is all very strange." Jane stood for a moment, looking first at the footprints that ended so mysteriously and then up into the branches of the tree above. Suddenly she sprang upward, seized a branch and drew herself up into the tree. Brown came running forward and stood beneath her. "Have you found anything, miss?" he asked. "There's only one explanation," she replied. "People do not vanish in thin air." Annette walked from the camp to the spot where her footprints ended beneath this tree. She did not return to the camp. There is only one place that she could have gone, and that is up here where I am. "But she couldn't have jumped up there the way you did," protested Brown. "She just couldn't have done it." "She didn't jump," said Jane. "Her tracks would have shown it, if she had jumped. She was lifted up." "Lifted up? My God, miss, by what?" Brown's voice was trembling with emotion. "It might have been a snake, miss, if you'll pardon me for suggesting it," said Tibbs. "It could have reached down and wound itself around her and pulled her up into the tree." "She would have screamed," said Brown. "We'd have heard her." "Snakes charm their victims so that they are helpless," said Tibbs. "That is all poppycock, Tibbs," said Jane, impatiently. "I don't believe snakes do anything of the sort, and it wasn't a snake that got her anyway. There has been a man up here. He has been in this tree for a long time, or if not a man, some sort of a man-like creature." "How can you tell that?" demanded Brown. "I can see where he squatted on this big branch," she replied. "The bark is scuffed a little, for he must have remained in the same position for a long time, and then in a line between where his eyes would have been and the camp, some small twigs have been cut away with a knife, giving a less obstructed view of the camp. Whatever it was, sat here for a long time watching us. Sporove and Tibbs had approached and were standing nearby. I told you I had nothing to do with it, said the former. I can't figure it out, said Brown. I just can't figure it out. If she had been frightened, she would have screamed for help and some of us would have heard her. I don't know, said Tibbs, but I saw something like it once before, sir. His Grace had a castle on the east coast up in Lincoln. It was a most lonely place, overlooking the North Sea. We only went there once a year for about 6 weeks, but that was enough, and what happened there the last time was why I gave notice. I couldn't stand the place any longer. Her Grace, the Duchess, was murdered there one night, and that was harrowing enough, but what happened 3 days later was, to my way of thinking, even worse. Her Grace had a maid she was very fond of, and 3 nights after the Duchess was murdered, the maid disappeared. She just vanished in thin air, as it were, sir. There was never a trace found of her from then until now, and the country folk round said that her Grace had come back for her, that it had happened before in the castle of the Duke of Dunningham, so I was thinking. For Pete's sake, shut up, cried Brown. You'll have us all nuts. Horrible, muttered Alexis. Well, whatever it was, it wasn't a ghost, said Jane. She dropped to the ground beside Brown and laid a hand on his arm. I'm sorry, Brown, she said, I know you were very fond of her, but I don't believe that there is anything we can do, except to try to reach some outpost of civilization and report the matter. Then a search will be made. It will be too late then, said Brown. I reckon it's too late now. She was so little and delicate. She couldn't have stood very much. She probably is dead by this time. He stopped speaking and turned away. Perhaps she's better off dead, he added. In silence the 4 ate of what little they had to eat, and then set out once more on their seemingly hopeless journey. There were few attempts at conversation. The 4 seemed stunned by the series of calamities that had overtaken them. Suspicion, fear, and distrust dogged their footsteps, and beside them stalked the shadow of the nameless menace that had snatched Annette away. Brown suffered more than the others, so much so that his mind was numb even to his hatred of Alexis. So completely did he ignore him that it was as though the man did not exist. Jane walked at the rear of the column. Her tread was firm and light, but Alexis, who was directly in front of her, was footsore and weary. He was, however, no worse off than Tibbs, for whose soft muscles continued exercise was little better than torture. Jane, said Sporove, after they had walked a long way in silence, haven't you any idea what it was took Annette away? Jane shook her head. All I know is that I don't believe in ghosts, and that no animal could have done it, therefore it must have been a man, but what sort of man, I have no idea. Whatever it was must have been as agile as a monkey, and for that reason I cannot bring myself to believe that it was a member of any native tribe. They are, as a rule, far from being excellent climbers, and I never heard of one who travelled through the trees as this creature must have, to reach our camp and depart again with Annette without leaving any spoor on the ground. But you are willing to believe now, that it was not I, queried Sporove. There is no reason to believe that you did it, replied Jane. Then why not give me the benefit of the doubt in the other matter? You must know that I couldn't have killed Kitty. What does it matter what I think? Asked Jane. That is a matter for the court to decide. Your opinion matters a lot to me, Jane. You have no idea how much. She looked at him shortly. I have no desire to know. The note of finality in her tone was lost on Sporove. But I want you to know, he persisted. I've never known anyone like you. I'm mad about you, Jane. You must have seen it. The girl shook her head impatiently. That will be about enough of that, Alexis, she said. Our situation is sufficiently difficult without your making it any worse. Does it make it any worse for you to know that someone is with you who loves you very much? He demanded. Oh, Jane, he cried, I could make you very happy." Then he seized her arm and tried to draw her to him. Once again she wrenched herself free, once again she struck him heavily in the face with her open palm. Instantly his expression changed. His face became contorted with rage. "I'll get you for this, you little..." "You'll do what?" demanded a man's voice angrily. The two looked up. Brown was striding toward them, followed by Tibbs. The hand axe swung at the pilot's side in his right hand. Burroughs cowered and backed away. "I'm going to finish you now, once and for all," said Brown. Jane stepped between the two men. "No, Brown," she said, "we can't take the law into our own hands, as much as we'd like to. But you're not safe as long as he's alive, none of us is." "I can take care of myself," replied Jane, "and if I can, I guess the rest of you can." Brown hesitated, but finally he acquiesced. "Very well," he said, "I can wait." There seemed a world of meaning in those few words, nor was it lost on Burroughs. That night they camped again near the little river whose winding the trail followed. The instant that they stopped, Burroughs and Tibbs threw themselves upon the ground thoroughly exhausted. "If I may say so, milady," said the latter, "I fancy I couldn't carry on for another half hour if my life depended upon it. Tomorrow you had better go on without me. I'm afraid I can't keep up, and I'm only delaying the rest of you." "You're doing splendidly, Tibbs," said Jane, encouragingly. "I know it's hard on you now, but you'll be surprised how quickly your muscles will toughen as they get accustomed to the work, and then you'll be able to keep up with any of us." "I hope so, milady, but the way I feel now I don't believe I'll be able to go on." "Don't worry, Tibbsy, we'll stick by you," said Brown, reassuringly. "It's mighty good of you, Mr. Brown, but..." "But nothing," said Brown. "We could get along with one less member in this outfit," and as he spoke, he stared straight at Burroughs, "but it ain't you, Tibbsy." "Now," said Jane, "I'm going out to look for meat. I want you men to promise me that you will not quarrel while I'm gone. We have already had too much bloodshed and disaster." "Tibbsy don't never fight with no one," said Brown, "and I won't be here, so you won't have to worry." "You won't be here?" demanded Jane. "Where are you going?" "I'm going with you, miss." "But you can't." "I can't hunt with you along." "Then you won't do no hunting," said Brown, "because I'm going with you. You may be boss, but there's one thing you ain't going to do no more." "What is that?" asked the girl. "You ain't going off alone by yourself, again, after what happened to Annette." "If I may say so, milady, I think Mr. Brown is quite right. We can't take any chances with you, milady." Jane shrugged. "Perhaps you're right," she said, "from your point of view, but really I'm much better able to take care of myself in the jungle than any of you." "That ain't neither here nor there," said Brown. "You just ain't going into the jungle alone, and that's that." "All right," said Jane, with a laugh. "I suppose I'll have to give in. Come ahead then, Brown, we'll see what we can find." Tibbs and Alexis watched them depart, and then the former turned to the prince. "Beg pardon, sir," he said, "but hadn't we better start building a boma and gathering firewood?" "Yes, you had," said Alexis, "and you'd better hurry up about it as it will soon be dark." "You're not going to help me, sir?" demanded Tibbs. "Certainly not, my man. I'm far too tired." "And how about me, sir? I'm tired, too." Tibbs was surprised at his own temerity. "You've no business to be tired. I'm not paying you to be tired. I'm paying you to work. Come, get busy, and don't be impudent. You seem to be forgetting yourself, Tibbs." "If I may make so bold as to say so, Your Highness, if you're not careful, I shall." What do you mean, you impertinent puppy? Demanded Alexis. Tibbs sat down on the ground and leaned his back against the tree. I mean, sir, that if you don't help and do your share there won't be any boma and there won't be any firewood when Lady Greystoke and Brown come back to the camp. I dare say they'll both be very angry, especially Brown. If I were you, sir, I wouldn't antagonize him any more. I suspect that he does not like you, and out here in the jungle, sir, where there ain't no laws nor no bobbies, he wouldn't need much more of an excuse to kill you. For a minute or two Alexis sat in silent thought, then he rose painfully and slowly. Come on, my man, he said, and I'll give you a hand with the boma. It was almost sunset when Jane and Brown returned with a small antelope, slices of which Tibbs was soon grilling before a cooking fire, while the others sat silently waiting. There was little conversation as they ate their slender meal. It was an ill-assorted company, with little in common among them other than the grim disasters which had befallen them and which made such depressing conversation that they were taboo as though by a tacit understanding. The girl and Brown each found the other the most congenial member of the party, and what little talk there was passed between these two, but very soon even they were silent, and presently all slept, except Tibbs who had the first watch. The long night wore on to the accompaniment of savage, jungle sound, usually remote but sometimes so close as to arouse the sleepers, stealthy sounds, weird sounds, fierce and savage sounds, sometimes whispering, sometimes thundering, died softly, dying into nothingness, or reverberated through the jungle until the earth trembled. Each in his turn, the men stood guard. At 4 a.m, Tibbs, completing his second tour, awoke Alexis who was to follow him. Shivering in the chill of early morning, Sporove piled more wood upon the fire. Then he stood with his back toward it gazing out into the night. Just beyond the farthest reaches of the firelight rose a black, impenetrable wall of darkness, a mysterious world filled with nameless terrors. When a tongue of flame leaped higher in the air than its fellows, its light glanced momentarily from the bole of a tree or from a cluster of leaves, giving the impression of movement out there beyond the rim of his little world. There were noises, too, sounds that he could not interpret. His fear and his imagination put strange interpretation upon the things that he saw and heard. A moaning woman floated at the borderline of reality. He could swear that he saw her. Sporove recalled the ghost of the murdered woman that came back for her maid, and cursed Tibbs. A beast screamed and Sporove shuddered. He turned away from the forest and sought to concentrate his mind upon other things. His eyes wandered over the figures of his sleeping comrades. They fell upon the hand axe lying close beside Brown. Sporove breathed an imprecation and tore his gaze away. It fell on Jane and rested there. How beautiful she was. Why did she spurn him? He had always had luck with women. He fascinated them, and he knew it. He could not understand why Jane repulsed him, and so he blamed Brown, whom he hated, assuring himself that the fellow had talked against him and embittered Jane's mind. His eyes wandered back to Brown and the hand axe. How he hated the man and feared him. The fellow would kill him. He had threatened him more than once. Alexis felt that if the man were dead, his own life would be safer and there would be no one to stand between him and Jane. He rose and walked nervously to and fro. Every once in a while he shot a glance at Brown and the axe. He walked closer to Tibbs and listened. Yes, the fellow was already asleep, sound asleep. He must have been asleep almost at the instant he touched the ground. Jane was asleep, too, and so was Brown. Sporove assured himself of both of these facts. If Brown were only dead. The thought repeated itself monotonously, drumming on his tired brain. If Brown were only dead. Presently Alexis Sporove seemed galvanized by a sudden determination. He moved directly, though stealthily, toward the sleeping Brown. He paused beside him and kneeled upon one knee. Listening intently, he remained there silent, motionless, then cautiously one hand crept out toward the axe. Brown moved and turned in his sleep, and Sporo froze with terror. Then the pilot resumed the regular breathing of sleep. Sporov reached out and seized the axe handle. His mad eyes glued upon the forehead of the sleeping man, he raised the weapon aloft to strike. 20. Nkima plays a game. Tarzan and the Waziri moved on in search of the village of the Kavuru. It was yet early in the morning, the dawn mists still defied the efforts of a low-swinging sun to dispel them. The spirits of the searchers were low, for they were many long marches from their homeland, and with each passing day a sense of the futility of their quest had been increasingly impressed upon them, for not once since they started had they seen any sign or clue to suggest that they were on the right track. Only vague rumors based upon tribal legend had suggested the fate of Bwaira, the daughter of Muviro. Several of the warriors felt that they were chasing a myth, and only great courage and loyalty kept them, uncomplaining, on the trail. It was true that Tarzan had met Edeni, the Kavuru, and that he had rescued Nika, the daughter of Gupingu, and heard her story, yet these things had occurred at such a remote distance from the land of the Waziri that even Muviro was commencing to doubt that it had been a Kavuru who had been responsible for the disappearance of Bwaira. For why should these strange men go so far afield when they could find young girls much closer to their mysterious village? But upon this chill and misty morning, it was not the Waziri alone who were depressed and discouraged. Upon the trail behind them, a damp and bedraggled little monkey swung through the trees. In one hand he carried a stick in the end of which fluttered a bit of paper. That he still clung to it was a miracle, for Nkima was not particularly tenacious of purpose. Perhaps it had become a fixed idea, for the stick was often an encumbrance to him, yet it never occurred to him to discard it. There was however another thought that was forming in his mind. It was the thought that he was very far from his own country, that he had lost Tarzan and could never find him again, and that he was very much afraid. It made him wish to turn around and start for home. He was almost upon the verge of turning about, when he recollected the grimacing visage of the disagreeable old male whom Nkima was certain thirsted for his lifeblood somewhere upon the back trail, and then there were Shieta, and Hista, the snake, and the bad Gomangani. All these lay behind him, and until he encountered some of their like upon the trail he was following, his little mind so functioned that he could not anticipate their presence there. What little Nkima did not know did not bother him. And so he continued on his way into a land that seemed free from inhospitable monkeys and bloodthirsty beasts and men. As the ascending sun warmed him, his spirits rose, and after he had discovered and robbed a bird's nest, sucking the eggs, he felt equal to any adventure. Then came the crowning moment of happiness. In the trail ahead of him, he saw a file of 10 Ebon warriors led by the giant white man who was his god. With a loud scream of joy that attracted the attention of the men below him, Nkima fairly flew through the trees to drop upon one of Tarzan's broad shoulders. "Where has Nkima been?" asked the ape-man. Tarzan thought that at last Shieta had caught him. "Little Nkima has been fighting with all the Manus in the forest," replied the monkey. "They tried to stop little Nkima from coming through their trees, but he scratched them and bit them and hit them with a stick. Then he chased them into the country where Kudu, the sun, lies down at night. That is where little Nkima has been, that is what he has been doing, that is why he has been away from Tarzan." The ape-man smiled. "Little Nkima is very brave," he said, as he stroked the little head nestled in the hollow of his neck. Tarzan noticed that Nkima still carried the message stick, and was surprised that his little friend should have been constant to one idea for so long a time, and then he noticed that the paper in the end of the stick was not the same as that which Nkima had taken away with him. The ape-man's curiosity was aroused. "What is that in the end of your stick, Nkima?" he asked. "Where did you get it? It is not the thing that Tarzan gave you. Let me see it." And he reached for it. Now Nkima had forgotten just why he had clung to the stick. He had forgotten that he had been mimicking the Waziri warrior who had carried the message to Tarzan. Also, he was very happy and wanted to play, so when Tarzan tried to take the paper from the end of the stick, Nkima saw therein a challenge and an invitation to a new game, and so he leaped nimbly from Tarzan's shoulder and scampered away, waving the stick with its bit of fluttering paper above him. The ape-man called to him to come back, but Nkima's thoughts were wholly centered upon play, and he only climbed the higher, grimacing and chattering in great good humor, as he challenged the ape-man to catch him. Perhaps if Tarzan had guessed the message that fluttered from the end of the cleft stick and all that it meant to him and one dear to him, he would not have laughed so lightly and let Nkima go his way unrebuked, but he did not know. Upon such trivial things may hinge the lives and happiness of men. Seeing that Tarzan did not pursue him, nor even pay any further attention to him, Nkima soon lost interest in the game and started to descend again to his master. But once more fate intervened, this time in the form of a fledgling bird trying its wings for the first time in short, uncertain flights. Little Nkima espied it, and forthwith forgot all else in the excitement of the chase. When the bird rested upon a twig he crept toward it, but when he would have seized it, it flew away just eluding his grasp. Again and again was this repeated, and as long as the bird remained in sight the excitement of the chase held Nkima enthralled. Farther and farther north he followed the fledgling, bearing with him the message that would have meant so much to Tarzan of the Apes, but at length, in a flight much longer sustained than any it had previously attained, the bird disappeared, and that was the last that Nkima saw of it. For no good reason he had pursued it, for thus his little monkey mind functioned. He had wasted his time, he had missed an opportunity to accomplish something worthwhile, and he had nothing to show for his pains. But then we have seen men do likewise. We have all chased chimeras. For some time Nkima continued on toward the north, impelled by the rapidly fading vestiges of the urge that had been driving him, but presently he noticed the paper in the end of the stick that he had been carrying mechanically because he had been carrying it for so long. This recalled Tarzan to his mind and the fact that he was again alone in a strange land. He decided to return to the ape-man and the Waziri, but even as the determination was forming he heard something to the north of him that aroused his curiosity, demanding investigation. It was the voice of a human being. Now, by nature Nkima is curious, and in addition Tarzan had trained him to investigate unusual occurrences, so it was not at all strange that he swung on through the trees in the direction of the voice that had attracted his attention, for the moment wholly absorbed in this new interest. From a lofty height he at last looked down upon the objects of his interest, two Tumangani, a he and a she. And when Nkima saw the he Tumangani he was glad that he was perching safely out of reach, for here was indeed a terrifying Tumangani. Nkima had never before seen a white man like this one. He had seen the Gomangani, the black men, thus arrayed, but never a white man. The fellow was large and powerful, with a fierce, evil face, the ferocity of which was surely not lessened by the straight piece of bone or ivory 6 or 8 inches long that pierced the septum of his nose, nor by the feathers in his headdress, nor the paint on his face, the rings in his ears, and the necklace of human teeth lying against his massive chest. Nkima noted all these things and more: the loin-cloth of gorilla skin, the armlets, wristlets, and anklets, the fiber rope wound many times about the waist, the dagger, and the spear. This was indeed a Tumangani to avoid. He filled little Nkima with fear, but not so his companion. She was of a far different mold, small, dainty, and with no indications of barbaric ornamentation. Had Nkima been accustomed to making intelligent deductions from his perceptions he would have guessed immediately that she was not of the same tribe, perhaps not of the same race as the man, but he could not have guessed that she was a French girl named Annette. No more could he know that the man was her captor, nor that he was a Kavuru. The mind of Nkima had its limitations. However, his curiosity was once more aroused. For this reason and another, he followed them. The other reason presupposes imagination, a characteristic that little Nkima possessed, as must all creatures that know how to play, for play is often make-believe, and make-believe requires imagination of no mean order. So now little Nkima pretended that he was stalking the two Tarmangani. He pretended that they were afraid of him and that presently he would leap upon them and destroy them. It was great fun for Nkima, of whom almost nothing in the whole jungle was afraid, little Nkima who could destroy so few creatures in his teeming world, from whom nothing more important than a fledgling bird might seek to escape. It gave him a fleeting sense of superiority. There are men like that. Often one sees them strutting, clothed in a shred of tenuous, evanescent authority, play-acting at importance. Pursuing this exciting game, he lost all sense of time, of which, at best, he had little or no conception. Presently night would come, and then he would know that time had passed, but while it was passing he gave it no thought. The afternoon waned. The quarry passed out of the forest into an open plain at the foot of a tall mountain. The distance from the forest to the mountain was not great. Nkima could see across the plain, cut with little ravines, cluttered with huge boulders, to a village that lay at the foot of a perpendicular cliff. A little river wound down toward the forest from the village, as though it rose in the village itself and flowed out beneath the gates of the lofty palisade. These things Nkima saw. He also saw the two he had been stalking cross the plain toward the village, but he did not follow them. After all, a game is a game, there is no use carrying one too far. He saw the gates open to admit the couple. He saw them close behind them. Then, for the first time, he realized that night was falling, and suddenly he became very lonely and afraid. He thought of Tarzan and the safety of that bronzed shoulder, then he turned and scampered through the trees back into the south, clutching the forked stick tightly in his little fist, whimpering as he went. 21, only 2 left. Tibbs awoke suddenly out of a sound sleep, and as he opened his eyes he saw Sporove with upraised hatchet kneeling above Brown. With a cry of warning, he leaped to his feet. Sporove hesitated an instant and looked quickly toward Tibbs. It was that momentary hesitation that saved Brown's life. Tibbs' cry awakened him, and almost instinctively he recoiled and rolled to one side. Perhaps it was a natural reaction to the note of warning and the terror in the voice of the Englishman. Sporove struck, but the sharp blade missed Brown by a fraction of an inch and was buried in the earth where his head had lain but a brief instant before. At Tibbs' cry Jane leaped to her feet, fully awake on the instant. Sporove, on one knee, reached his feet before Brown, and clinging to the hatchet fled into the jungle. Brown started in pursuit, but Jane called him back. "Don't follow him," she said. "What's the use? We are well rid of him, he won't dare come back now. If you followed him, he might lie in wait for you and kill you. We can't spare any more, we are all too few now." Brown turned back. "I hate to let him get away with anything like that. But I suppose you're right. He could hide and get me in that mess of trees and undergrowth before I knew what it was all about." He shook his head ruefully. "But I still hate to let him go, he ought to get what's coming to him." "He will out there alone," prophesied Jane. "Hiopsy does before ever High lays eyes on him again, the bounder, if you'll pardon me, milady." "I think you're quite right, Tibbs, we all feel the same about the man. But now we are only 3, though he never was much good to us." "Much good," exploded Brown. "Megawd, miss, he wasn't no good. He never done a thing except make trouble. If I don't never see the sight of him again that will be 20 years too soon." "Prince?" There was a world of contempt and irony in the American's tones. "If they was all like him I don't wonder they've been kicking him out." Jane smiled. "There have been some pretty good ones, Brown, and there still are. Princes like Sporove are not really princes at all, it is often just a courtesy title, as meaningless as a colonelcy in Kentucky. They don't rate very high in their own countries." Brown grinned. "They sure are the fair-haired boys in America, though. It was that title the poor old lady fell for, and look what it cost her. American women are fools, the way they go for titles. Jane smiled good-naturedly. I'm an American, you know, Brown. The pilot flushed. Heck, no, miss, I didn't know it. I'm sorry. You needn't be, because you're right about some American women, the climbers. It's not as bad as it used to be, but Americans still buy titles, and they don't often get very much for their money beside the titles. Oftentimes even the titles are as spurious as their owners. I recall reading a book written a number of years ago by a French count who had married a daughter of one of America's richest railroad families. He made fun of his wife's people, their poor taste, their love of money. Yet nothing that they were accused of could have been in such rotten taste as this book, nor was their love of money any greater than his by his own admission, for he bragged of having sold his title for their money. In the same breath he spoke of the honor of his house and his ancient lineage. He and his kind are sickening. I grow more and more to agree with my husband's appraisal of beasts and men. He prefers the beasts. Brown shook his head dubiously. I ain't got much use for men, myself, he admitted, leastwise some men, but if your husband was in our fix I reckon he'd be doggone glad to get out of this jungle back where there were plenty of men and no beasts. You don't know my husband. Well, perhaps he'd rather be here than in good old Kai, but I wouldn't. Then we'd better start getting out, suggested Jane. There's nothing to keep us here any longer. Quite right, milady, if you'll pardon my saying so, agreed Tibbs. I'm for hopping off right away, said Brown. Perhaps, well, perhaps. Perhaps what? Asked Jane. I was just thinking of Annette. I know there ain't no chance of running across her, but I can't help hoping. We're all hoping, Brown. That's about all we can do, I'm afraid. Jane laid a sympathetic hand on the man's arm. As the three set out once more upon the trail toward the east, a pair of eyes watched them from the foliage of a nearby tree, sinister, unblinking eyes that appraised the two men casually but were most often centered upon Jane. Brown took the lead, setting a pace that would not be too hard on Tibbs. He had learned that whatever pace he set, the girl was equal to it, perhaps even more. He often wondered at her strength, endurance, and nerve. She was not at all the sort of person that he had imagined a titled Englishwoman would be. He had always thought of women of her class as pampered, helpless creatures. It seemed strange to him now that he should look up to one as a trusted, dependable leader. That is, it seemed strange when he gave the matter any thought, otherwise, it appeared perfectly natural. He had never followed a man in whom he had greater confidence, or for whom he had more respect, than this slender, beautiful lady of quality. Behind Brown came Tibbs. The night's rest had refreshed him. His muscles were already becoming inured to the hardships of the trail. He swung along this morning like a veteran. It's a grand day, milady, he remarked, if you don't mind my saying so. I feels as our things was going to be a little bit of all right, you know, from now on. I hope so, Tibbs. Perhaps the worst is over. If we only knew just where we were, it would make things so much easier. We may be headed straight for some friendly village where we can get guides, or we may be headed into a wilderness. That is what troubles me most. If we only knew. The Duke of Dunningham used to say that what we don't know won't never harm us, milady. It won't do us any good, either, laughed Jane. But maybe he wasn't ever lost in Africa, suggested Tibbs. I never had no idea Africa was such a large place. It covers quite a lot of territory, Tibbs. It's no place to be lost. I'd hate to be lost in it all alone, milady, like his Highness. My word, milady, but he must be frightened back there all alone, nothing only his thoughts to keep him company. And such terrible thoughts, Tibbs. I shudder to think what they must be, but I'm not worrying about him, it's poor little Annette. Tibbs was silent. He too was thinking of Annette. Gliding silently through the trees behind them followed a tireless stalker. Seldom now were those cruel eyes allowed to wander from the slender figure of the girl swinging along behind the two men. As the hours passed, Tibbs commenced to tire again. He lagged a little and dropped farther behind Brown. He no longer sought to converse with Jane. He was too tired to talk. The last couple of times that he had glanced back to see if the girl were coming, he had stumbled because his muscles were so weary and his feet seemed so heavy, so he gave it up, and set his mind wholly upon plodding steadily ahead. He thought that Brown would never stop. What was the man made of, anyway? Iron. His legs and feet seemed to be mechanical things that must go on, forever. They no longer seemed a part of him. Yet he realized that he had done better today, that he had tired less quickly than on previous days. That was something, but sitting down would be heaven. Would Brown never stop? But at last Brown did stop. "This looks like as good a place as any to stop for the night," he said. "Tired, Tibbsy?" The Englishman staggered up and threw himself to the ground. "Tired," he echoed. "Mr. Brown, there ain't no word in the whole bloomin' Oxford English dictionary that's as tired as I am." Brown laughed. "Well, I don't feel so chipper myself," he admitted. "I'll bet the lady's the freshest one of all. Say, where is she?" Tibbs looked back along the trail. "She was right behind me the last time I looked. Doubtless she'll be along in a second." "She shouldn't get so far behind," grumbled Brown. It was evident that he was becoming apprehensive. Then he called aloud. "Hi, there! Lady Greystoke." There was no answering call. The two men stared expectantly along the trail. Tibbs rose wearily to his feet. Brown called again. There was only silence. Brown looked at Tibbs. There was an expression on the American's face that Tibbs had never seen there before. It was fear, but it was not fear for himself. At a run, Brown started along the back trail. Tibbs staggered after him. Occasionally Brown would stop and call the missing girl's name aloud, but there was never any answer. They kept on until darkness overtook them. Tibbs was exhausted, he could go no farther. Brown, too, was almost at the limit of his powers. They threw themselves to the ground. "It ain't no use," said Brown wearily. "She's gone, just like Annette, and I think in the same way. Why didn't she let me kill him? Why didn't I kill him anyway? I knew I should have." "You think it was the prince?" "Sure it was, the dirty. Oh, what's the use? It's all my fault for letting a woman tell me what to do. She's a grand woman, but women are all alike when it comes to a job like that, they're too soft-hearted. I ought to have killed him when I first wanted to. We'd have had Lady Greystoke and Annette both with us now if I had." "It ain't your fault, Mr. Brown," said Tibbs soothingly. "You only done what any man would have done. We all of us promised to hobby Lady Greystoke, and she told you not to kill him. Though, if you'll pardon my saying so, I think the blighter ought to have been killed long ago." The rumble of a lion's roar echoed through the darkening forest, awakening the men to the dangers of the coming night. Brown groaned. "If I only knew where they were. If I just knew they was alive. If he hasn't killed 'em, just think of 'em back there somewheres in the dark with only that pansy to look after 'em." The gloom of Brown's mood was reflected in his voice. "You don't really think he'd kill Lady Greystoke, do you?" demanded Tibbs, horrified. It was quite one thing to kill a lady's maid, but another, an unthinkable thing, to kill a titled lady. Tibbs' viewpoint on such matters was largely a matter of heredity. His people had been serving people as far back as any of them knew, and training and habit of thought. His snobbishness was the snobbishness of the serving class, ingrained and ineradicable. "No, I don't think he'd kill her, unless she resisted him, and there ain't no question about that. But he did have good reason to want to kill poor little Annette. If it was him that got her, she's dead all right. God, if I could only lay my hands on him. What say we backtrack tomorrow and keep on hunting till we find him? We may never find them, but it would be some satisfaction to find him. What do you say, Tipsy? I'll let you help me kill him. I've never been one that believed in bloodshed, Mr. Brown, but I do say, and I am not ashamed of it, that if he killed Lady Greystoke and Annette, I'd like nothing better than to do him in all by my bloomin' self. But, Mr. Brown, I don't think we ought to turn back. I think we should carry on just like milady told us to, and get help to come back our hand search for them, someone that knows the country. I suppose you're right, Tibbsy. We couldn't find the Empire State Building if it was wandering around in this man's jungle, let alone a couple of girls. A lion roared again, nearer this time. I reckon we'd better climb a tree, Tibbsy, and wait for daylight. It don't look like sleeping on the ground was going to be very healthy. My father always said it was most unhealthy. He got rheumatism something terrible sleeping on the ground in the Crimea. Then let's climb, said Brown. I don't want to get rheumatism.